Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time when the kitchen wasn't a room, it was just wherever the fire happened to be. Welcome to medieval Europe, where food is smoked before it's even seasoned, your only oven is a hole in the ground or someone else's fireplace, and guess what? You probably won't survive this. Actually, statistically speaking, if you were born in the Middle Ages, your chances of making it to your 30s were shaky at best, and food, how you got it, cooked it or didn't, had a lot to do with that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, what city are you in right now? What time is it for you? I love knowing where in the world you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's early. Not early by your standards, like before the sun. Early as in the hearth still glows faintly red from the coals of yesterday's fire, and the world outside your wattle and daub walls is ink black and damp. You're already up because you've got work to do. In this medieval household, probably a modest peasant cottage, everything revolves around the fire, literally. The hearth is the gravitational centre of the home, and your morning begins by coaxing the ashes into life. You kneel on the packed earth floor, lift a corner of a blackened lid over the fire pit, and gently blow on the embers, careful not to inhale a lungful of yesterday's smoke. It tastes bitter, gritty, like old bacon fat and singed hair. You add a little kindling, twigs from the bundle your sister gathered yesterday, and pray it catches. No matches, no lighters, just you, your breath, and the stubbornness of damp wood. You can feel your fingers stiffen from the cold as the flame finally dances, flickering uncertainly like it too doesn't want to be awake yet. Your house, if you can call it that, is more of a smoke trap than a kitchen. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, which may or may not be working today depending on the wind. So as the fire catches, smoke billows upward, curls into the beams and slowly leaks out, or doesn't. You're used to squinting through the haze, the way it settles into your hair and skin, into the straw you sleep on, the way your clothes always smell like meat even when there is none. The fire is everything. Heat, light, food, protection, but it's also a hazard. Half of your neighbours have burns somewhere. Arms, legs, faces. And don't even ask how many homes burn down every year. All of them, eventually. Breakfast is a generous word. Most mornings there's just pottage, the eternal stew. It's been cooking since yesterday, and the day before that. Maybe even longer. You don't clean out the pot, you just keep adding to it. A little barley, some wild leeks, a scrap of salted pork if you're lucky. The flavours meld together into something that's warm, filling, and occasionally disgusting. You stir it with a stick, not because it needs stirring, but because it gives you something to do with your hands while your stomach complains. This morning, though, you're preparing for something bigger, slaughter day. That means someone in your village has butchered a pig, and if your family helped or bartered right, you might have access to the scraps, some fat for rendering, maybe some offal. It's a good day. Meat days don't happen often, especially this far from a lord's manor. So you get the fire good and hot, because you'll need it for boiling, scalding and preserving. The smell will be strong, sharp and iron-rich. Blood has a way of settling into everything. As the fire roars to life, you arrange your tools, nothing fancy, a heavy iron cauldron with a bottom blackened from years of use. A spit made of green wood. A few knives, not exactly sharp but serviceable. Most are shared between households. If you've got your own knife, it probably doubles as your eating utensil, woodworking tool and defence against stray dogs. There are no cutting boards. You work on flat stones or directly over the pot. Here's a fun little detail, fringe but true. The smoke you've been breathing in your whole life? It's also been curing your house, literally. The rafters above are black and shiny, not just from soot but from years of being infused with oily, meaty particles. And oddly, that preserved the beams, kept out some pests. So congratulations, your ceiling is technically edible, not advisable, but edible. Of course, while you're working the fire and eyeing the pot, there's debate out in the wider world. Scholars still argue about how widespread communal ovens were during this period. In towns and some wealthier villages, yes, you might take your bread dough to a shared oven, possibly managed by the local lord or a baker. But out here, you're likely baking on stones near the fire. Or in a cloche, an upside-down ceramic dome that traps heat like a poor man's oven. Some researchers insist even peasants had access to small earth ovens, while others believe such luxuries were rare and seasonal. Either way, you do what you can. By the time the sun's just starting to peek over the thatched roofs, Your fire is steady, the pottage bubbling, and the scent of rendered fat slicks the air. You're already sweating from the heat, even though it's freezing outside. Your stomach rumbles, but you hold off eating. Food is precious, and it needs to stretch. Your little siblings are awake now, eyes red from smoke, voices raspy. They crowd near the fire, careful not to knock the pot. Someone tries to sneak a taste, and you smack their hand away with the spoon. The pottage isn't done yet, and raw beans will punish their gut later. You step outside briefly. The mist still clings to the ground, and the village is quiet but stirring. Somewhere a rooster crows, a dog barks. You can smell someone else's fire, a mix of burning straw and something less pleasant, maybe dung. People burn what they have. Back inside, you wipe your eyes and sit cross-legged near the hearth. You glance at the fire, your fire, and feel that strange, silent pride that comes from keeping something alive that could so easily go out. It's just flame, sure, but it's also everything. And this morning, at least for now, it's enough. You stay close to the hearth because that's where all things begin and end in your world. The fire isn't just heat or a cooking tool, it's your anchor. Without it, nothing else functions. Food doesn't cook, water doesn't boil, light disappears. You'd freeze, you'd starve, or you'd die. Dramatic, sure, but it's also just accurate. Even now, as the smoke curls around your ankles and your eyes sting from the haze, you know there's no surviving this life without that stubborn little flame. Your house, like most in your village, is basically one big room with zones, not walls. At the centre, dug directly into the packed earth floor, sits the hearth. It's a shallow depression, black with ash and bordered by stones. No chimney, no hood, just a hole in the roof to let the worst of the smoke escape. In theory, more often it just pools under the rafters, lacing your thatch with centuries of soot. The fire's glow throws long shadows across the rough wooden beams above you, the kind that make the room feel like it's breathing, alive, almost watching you. Cozy, sure, but also a little haunted. Around the hearth, life radiates outward, like ripples in a pond. You've got your sleeping mats nearby, hay if you're lucky, old rags if you're not. There's a bench, a few low stools, maybe even a table if someone in your family can work wood. But everything revolves around this circle of warmth and danger. It's your light source, your stove, your drying rack, your smokehouse, your little sun. It even decides where the dog sleeps, and when your baby brother crawls too close, it becomes a screaming, hissing monster. Scars from that lesson last a lifetime. Most meals are made right here, just inches from where you sleep. There's no kitchen, no division between food and rest or privacy and chores. Your only division is distance from the fire. The closer you are, the more valuable or vulnerable you are. It's an invisible hierarchy and everyone learns it early. Guests, elders and toddlers get the best spots. Teenagers like you hover near the edge, close enough to stir the pot, far enough to dodge the smoke if the wind shifts. You stir the pottage again, the stick now warm in your hand. Steam rises with a tang of turnip and the sour note of fermented grains. A bubbling rhythm keeps time with the rooster outside. You adjust the iron tripod above the fire, hoisting the pot an inch higher to cool the boil. There's no dial to turn, no timer, just you and your best guess. This is cooking in medieval times. Instinct over instruction, smell over measurement. Recipes exist, sure, but not for you, not for peasants. Yours is a cuisine passed down in gestures and to memory. You check the small bundle of herbs tucked into a leather pouch at your belt. Sage, marjoram, maybe a wilted sprig of thyme if you didn't use it all yesterday. Herbs are the only thing you can count on to make the pottage taste like more than just hot. You crush a pinch between your fingers and let it fall into the bubbling mass. Sizzles briefly, then disappears. You won't taste much of it, but it's there. That's what matters. Here's something odd. Fringe knowledge, but very real. In some regions, especially parts of Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, hearths were deliberately left smouldering overnight using a ritual method called banking the fire. You'd bury embers under ashes to trap the heat, like tucking it in for bed. The next morning you'd dig them back up and hopefully have just enough glow to reignite the flame without starting from scratch. Fire wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. People believed hearth fires had souls. A cold hearth wasn't just inconvenient, it was bad luck, sometimes even an omen. You glance up. Hanging from a beam above are bundles of drying mushrooms and strips of meat, if you're lucky. More often it's just herbs, onions, or a few apples if they haven't already shriveled into nothing. This is your pantry, your ceiling. All of your storage is up there, dangling like strange decorations. It keeps the food away from rats and damp ground, and in return, everything tastes vaguely of smoke. You don't mind, you grew up with that flavour. It's the taste of home. As the morning warms, neighbours start to stir, doors creak open. The village starts its daily song. Hens clucking, hooves crunching over frost, and someone yelling at a runaway goat. You hear your neighbour pounding something, maybe grains in a mortar, maybe laundry against a rock. It's hard to tell. Everything in this world is loud in its own handmade way. You step outside and catch a whiff of someone else's fire. It's different, sweeter, like they're toasting something. Maybe it's just the last scraps of last year's barley bread turned into mush for porridge. You feel a little envious, even though you know your own stew isn't bad today. That's the thing about cooking without a kitchen. Your entire neighbourhood becomes a constant waft of other people's meals. You know who has meat, you know who's making ale, and you definitely know who's burning something, because the smoke turns from grey to angry black and someone starts swearing. There's this scholarly debate that shows up from time to time about whether medieval hearths were truly communal in design, or more individually centred around nuclear family units. Some argue that large longhouses, especially in early medieval times, had shared fires with multiple families working together. Others insist that even then the fire belonged to one matriarchal figure who dictated its use. Which makes you wonder, is this your fire or your mother's? She's the one who really knows how to use it. You're just borrowing it temporarily, trying not to mess up the stew. She returns a bit later with a basket of foraged greens and roots, her hair pulled back, her eyes narrowed against the morning light. Without a word, she kneels beside you, takes one look at the pot and sniffs. Too thin, she says. You sigh. She's not wrong. She never is. She adds the roots, thick slices dropping into the pot with soft splashes. Then she grabs the stirring stick and gives it one full circle like sealing a spell. You glance around the hearth again, taking in its chaotic geometry. Ash in the corners, scorch marks on the stone, the broken leg of the tripod mended with wire. Somehow all of it works. No tiles, no counters, no sink, just fire, pot and family. You don't think of it as primitive, it's just life. You don't miss gas stoves or electric kettles because those things haven't been invented. What you do miss though are eggs. Eggs are rare right now. The hens have stopped laying, but maybe because it's getting colder. Maybe because something's been snatching them at night. Either way, the pottage will have to do. Someone calls from outside. Your younger brother rushes in, shouting about a trader arriving in town. That could mean dried fish, or salt, or even spices. You feel a jolt of hope, even if you know you probably can't afford any of it. Still, the idea is enough. A different flavour. A break from the routine. Your mouth waters. You stand, stretch your legs, and look at the fire one more time before heading out to sea. It's still going strong. Crackling with that deep orange core that says it'll keep cooking for hours, just like you. The fire fades behind you as you step outside, boots crunching softly over the frost-crusted ground. The village is finally alive. Thin columns of smoke twist upward from other homes, and in the distance the low clatter of hooves suggests someone's hauling firewood or hay. You pass your neighbour's cottage, where a crooked pot hangs on an arm of iron over a fire pit similar to yours. A woman leans over it, face flushed with heat, stirring something that smells unmistakably of cabbage and lentils. You nod. She nods back, no words needed. You're headed to the central clearing, not far from the chapel where the stone bell tower casts its long skeletal shadow over the dirt path. That's where the trader will stop, if he hasn't already left. You pick up the pace. Food moves fast in a hungry village. When you arrive, you spot him, the trader. A cart pulled by a tired-looking donkey, the wheels caked in mud from some distant road. The man himself looks equally muddy, his beard like straw and his coat patched more than whole, but his goods, wrapped bundles, clay jars sealed with wax, strings of dried something hanging from hooks, you edge closer, heart ticking with curiosity. Maybe you'll spot something new, or old, or edible, and there, among the usual dull sacks of salt and oats, is something incredible, an iron skillet, flat, round, and perfectly black from years of use. It gleams faintly in the pale sun, and you feel your fingers twitch. Most cooking in your house happens in pots or on spits, or directly over the coals. A skillet like this, it means options. It means pancakes instead of porridge, flatbreads that don't taste like ash, You want it like you've never wanted food before, but you know you can't have it. That skillet would cost more than a month's rent, assuming your family even pays rent and not labour, which mostly you do, so you settle for watching. And as you do, you start to think about the tools you do have back home. They are not glamorous, but they work. A cauldron, a ladle, a dull knife passed down the 3 generations, some tongs made of bent iron, and the spit, crude, long, carved from green wood, turning slowly when jammed between 2 forked sticks. Every one of those tools is essential. None of them is comfortable. But that's cooking in medieval times, utility over luxury. You turn back toward home, mind already returning to the fire. That pot of pottage should be thicker now, maybe even crusting slightly around the edges. That's the good part, the smoky, almost burnt layer where the flavours concentrate. You might be able to scrape some of it into your bowl before anyone else does. On your way back, you pass the village blacksmith. He's already at work, hammering out something that rings with a metallic, rhythmic clang. His fire is hotter than yours ever gets, bellows-fed and angry, glowing white-hot at its centre. You catch a glimpse of something cooking on the edge of his forge. A small loaf of bread in a covered iron pot, probably his lunch. Blacksmiths, it turns out, often double as bakers of sorts. When your forge burns all day, you might as well use the heat. It's a little-known trick, not exactly legal in towns with official bakers' guilds, but out here in the countryside, you do what works. Back at your own hearth, the fire is still going strong, and the pot has reduced just like you hoped. You stir it again, scraping the edge for that sticky, caramelised bit. A few moments later, your mother adds a scrap of pork belly, just enough to flavour the whole pot. The fat sizzles and turns the broth glossy. Everyone leans closer, sniffing. Even the dog sits up straighter. The tripod over your fire is iron, rusted at the joints, but reliable. It holds the pot at a careful distance, and if you want to adjust the heat, you don't move the fire, you move the pot. You lower it by notches in the chain or prop it with stones. Every adjustment matters. Too close and you'll burn the food, too far and it'll never cook. The medieval kitchen is all about patience and judgment. No knobs, no timers, just you, your nose, and the hiss of boiling broth. This brings up something scholars like to argue about. Just how common were iron tools in peasant households? Some insist they were rare luxuries, that most cooking was done in clay pots or wooden trenchers, and the average home made do with stone and fire. Others argue that blacksmiths were widespread enough to outfit even the poorest families with at least the basics. A cauldron, a fire grate, maybe a meat hook or 2. The answer is probably somewhere in between. If you live near a trade route, or a generous lord, or a skilled smith, your kitchen might be surprisingly well equipped. If not, you may do. Lunch comes and goes without ceremony. Everyone gathers around the pot and bowls are filled, wooden or clay, depending on what hasn't cracked yet. There's no cutlery, aside from knives. You scoop with a crust of bread or sip directly from the bowl. The bread is coarse, more bran than flour, full of grit from the grinding stone. Your teeth will thank you later by falling out before you turn 30, but still the meal is warm, filling, and in a strange way satisfying. It's not about flavour so much as sustenance, calories, warmth, survival. You lean back on your stool, full for now, the fire crackling beside you, and glance up at the ceiling again. There's a new bundle drying near the rafters. Wild garlic leaves. Someone's been foraging. The air smells sharp and earthy, mixing with the meat and smoke and herbs. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine yourself in a much fancier kitchen, one with copper pans and clean walls and something called ventilation. But no, you're still here, in your one-room house, with your eternal pot of stew and your smoke-stung eyes. And that's okay, because in this world, food isn't a hobby or a science or an art. It's life. And you're getting pretty good at staying alive. You're slouched near the fire again, belly full, eyes half-lidded, as the midday warmth seeps into your bones. Outside, the village hums with the quiet rhythm of chores. Nothing frantic, just the everyday grind of living without machines or calendars. A thump here, a distant laugh, the occasional sharp bark of a dog fighting over a bone. You feel a little dazed, honestly. Maybe it's the meal. Maybe it's the smoke slowly marinating your lungs. Either way, it's the perfect moment to think about the most overlooked character in the medieval kitchen drama, firewood. You'd think, living surrounded by trees, that wood would just be there, ready, infinite. But it's not that simple. You don't just grab a branch and throw it in the fire. There's a hierarchy to fuel, Not all wood burns the same, and not all fires serve the same purpose. Some woods are for heat, quick and hot. Some are for cooking, slow and smoky, so others are for punishment. But that's a different story for a different night. Your fire today is burning alder and a bit of oak. Alder burns clean and oak holds its heat like a grudge, but that oak had to be seasoned, left to dry for months, maybe years. Use it too green and your fire will sulk, spitting sparks and drowning in its own steam. You remember the last time your brother tried to use fresh wood. You had to eat half-cooked barley mash with a smoky centre and a burnt crust that could chip teeth. Lesson learned. The woodpile outside your house isn't just a pile, it's a plan, a strategy. You stack it carefully, bark down, ends out, angled just enough to shed rain. There's dry kindling wrapped in straw, emergency bundles stored under the eaves, and the logs you don't touch unless it's freezing. And when it's raining, you're out there anyway, coats soaked, splitting wet logs and praying the inner cores dry. You've started more than one fire using half-burnt moss and hope. Fuel is survival, and not just in your little house. Entire forests near towns have been razed for firewood. In some places, wood became so scarce that laws were passed to protect forests. Peasants were fined, or worse, for collecting fallen branches from a lord's estate. Imagine being arrested for picking up a stick. It happened, probably more than once, and not everyone used wood. In the highlands and certain boggy regions they burned peat, those thick black bricks cut from the earth, stacked and dried like loaves of dirty bread. Peat smells strong when it burns, like earth and rot and old stories. But it works. It holds heat, smokes long, and was often more reliable than wood during wet seasons. Of course, cutting peat is miserable work. You've done it once. Mud up to your knees, gnats in your eyes, hands frozen stiff. But afterward, back home, that first spark, it's like victory. There's another fuel that turns up in the corners of Europe. Dried dung, usually from cows, sometimes horses. You've never used it, but you've smelled it. Sharp, acrid, almost spicy in the worst way. Still, for folks without trees, it worked. In open plains and high mountain villages, dried dung cakes fueled meals and lives. Not glamorous, but hey, body in the Middle Ages was aiming for glamorous. You shift a little, throwing another log into the hearth. Sparks fly up in a brief golden fan, and for a moment, the whole room glows like an amber lantern. The pot rocks gently from the jolt, and a waft of warm barley and pork steam hits your face. Not bad for scraps and boiled roots. As the log catches, it crackles with that satisfying snap and hiss sound. It's like the fire is settling in for a story of its own. You grab a small fan, woven reeds, and give it a few light wafts to encourage the flame. No bellows here, just breath and patience. Here's a curious side note. In noble kitchens, especially in large castles or manors, fire wasn't always made in the room itself. Sometimes the main kitchen was a separate building entirely, to reduce the risk of setting the whole house on fire. Fires were bigger, more controlled, and often maintained by dedicated staff. There were scullions, turnspits, and full-time fire tenders. You're all those things in one. Cook, cleaner, fuel scout, and human thermometer. You glance at the pot again, this time not to eat, but to clean. Not that you'll scrub it or anything. Cleaning in your world means scraping the pot, tossing in water, swishing it around, and maybe wiping it with a cloth that's been questionably clean since Easter. Sometimes you add a bit of ash to the water. It's mildly abrasive, better than nothing, but usually you just keep cooking in the same pot. Little leftover flavour never hurt anyone. Well, maybe it did, but you'll take your chances. By now the fire's heat is filling the room again. It pushes the damp out of the corners, curls into the rafters, and makes the shadows dance like they're trying to tell secrets. The dog curls at your feet, eyes half shut. You sit back and let the warmth soak into your skin. For a moment it's almost peaceful, except there's that one mystery again. A historical grey area. Scholars still bicker about whether most peasant homes had indoor fires, or if outdoor cooking was more common in warmer seasons. There's some evidence of communal ovens, shared fire pits, and even fireless food prep. Think raw dairy, pickled roots, or dried grain mash. Some archaeologists argue that cooking outside was safer, while others believe indoor hearths were essential for heat and always used. Smoke be damned. You've done both. On nice days you take the pot outside, cook over an open flame, and let the breeze carry the smoke away. But today, too cold. Indoors wins. The log crackles again, this time louder, and a tiny ember jumps out onto the dirt floor. You instinctively stomp it out with your boot. No panic, it happens all the time. Still it's a reminder this fire is alive, it demands respect, and one wrong move and the house goes up with it. That's why there's always someone tending it. Even in your sleep, your ears are tuned for the sound of dying embers. You wrap the rest of the dried herbs in a cloth and hang them back from the rafter. Your eyes still smarting from the smoke, but your body warm. Another log on the fire, another hour closer to dinner. Another day survived. It's not fancy. It's not clean. But it works. And in this world, that's enough. Afternoon stretches itself lazily across the village like a cat in a sunbeam, and you can feel the pace of everything slow just a little. Morning's rush is over. Water hauled, bread baked or not burned too badly, livestock tended, and now you're in that hazy part of the day where people start asking the same timeless question, when do we eat again? But here's the thing, in the Middle Ages, mealtimes don't really follow the nice, polite breakfast, lunch, dinner rhythm you're used to. There are no digital clocks, no kitchen timers, no polite brunches with avocado toast. Time is told by sun and shadow, and eating is more about rhythm and need than it is about scheduling. Right now, the sun's a little past its peak, what you might call early afternoon, and that means one of the two main meals of the day is either happening or about to happen. The first was probably sometime mid-morning, called dinner back then, weirdly enough. The second, called supper, comes later, when the light starts to fade and the chill creeps back in. Breakfast? That's still optional. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially among peasants, breakfast didn't really exist the way we think of it. It was more like, if there's food left over and you're awake, eat it. And if you were working early, like, say, in a field since dawn, you might grab a hunk of bread, some cheese if it hadn't moulded into a science experiment, and a splash of weak ale to wash it down. That was your breakfast. Functional. Quick. And probably consumed while walking. Forget eggs, pancakes, or coffee. Coffee won't even be a thing here for another few centuries, and when it does arrive, it'll be suspicious, exotic, and probably accused of being Satan's bean water by someone important. Your household, being a modest peasant family, is lucky to have 2 meals most days, one around this time and another before nightfall. Anything beyond that, celebration territory. Or harvest, or ironically famine prep. Because sometimes you eat more not because there's plenty, but because you don't know when the next chance will be. So now you help with the second pot of the day, a fresh pottage, slightly different from the morning version, mostly because someone brought back a bundle of wild greens from the forest. It's not much, but it makes the meal feel new. Into the pot it goes. Nettle, dandelion, sorrel, tangy, leafy, and just bitter enough to wake up your tongue. You chop them roughly with your knife, careful not to let the blade slip, then it's dull and your hand is wet. One wrong move and you're explaining to your mother why you can't carry buckets for a week. As the greens wilt into the broth, the smell shifts. Brighter, greener, less heavy than before. Someone adds a handful of oats, a few dried beans. There's no such thing as exact measurement here. You cook with what you've got, in the amounts that feel right. A dash of this, a pinch of that. That's why no two pottages are ever quite the same. It's like medieval jazz. Improvisational, occasionally brilliant, sometimes questionable. A neighbour stops by carrying a loaf of bread wrapped in a cloth. She trades it for a portion of your soup. It's an unspoken agreement that happens all the time. No money changes hands, just food for food, warmth for warmth. Her bread is slightly sour, maybe from bad yeast, maybe intentional, hard to tell, but it's fresh and the crust is thick and golden. You tear off pieces and pass them around. The dog gets a nibble too. Here's a strange fact. Monks in some monasteries used to ring bells to signal meal times, which was basically the only consistent food schedule in medieval Europe. In secular homes, though, you ate when the sun allowed it. Candlelight was expensive. Firewood, we already know, was precious. So once the light faded, the meal ended. You didn't sit around binging anything unless it was a religious feast, and even then you had to earn that binge with fasting first. By now the pot's steaming again, and your mother ladles portions into waiting bowls, not ceramic. Clay. Handmade, uneven, and warm to the touch. You settle down beside the hearth again, fingers curling around the bowl, letting the heat sink into your palms. The broth is thin, sure, but it's rich in its own way. Earthy, herbal. You slurp quietly, careful not to spill on your tunic. That's your only one until wash day. And even then, clean is a flexible term. This might surprise you, but the concept of a midday meal break wasn't universal. In fact, if you were a serf working under the local lord's watchful eye, Your mealtimes could vary wildly. Some manors were generous, allowing a few hours of rest for food. Others kept you moving from dawn to dusk with only a bite between. And if you were in town apprenticing under a guild master, you might get a structured lunch, but also a lecture about wasting time. Meal timing also changed with the seasons. In winter, when days were short, everything happened earlier. In summer, when the sun lingered, you might eat later, even outdoors. You remember those summer nights, the pot on an open flame in the yard, everyone gathered around on logs or stones, eating while the sky turned orange and the fire crackled under the stars. But not today. Today is wind and mud and smoke. Today is indoor eating, and the hearth is doing overtime. After the meal, the pot is left on to simmer again. What's left will become tomorrow's breakfast, assuming nobody sneaks a second portion tonight. You scrape your bowl clean with a crust of bread and then lick the last bit from your fingers. No shame here. Wasting food is practically a crime. Your father tells stories of winters when people boiled leather for broth. You're not sure if he's exaggerating. Probably not. As the day winds down, the light shifts. Gold turns to grey, and shadows stretch across the floor like lazy dogs. You bank the fire, pushing the logs closer, tucking coals under a layer of ash to preserve their heat, just like always, and you wonder, idly, what mealtime will look like in the future. Clean counters, silver pots, machines that cook for you? Sounds nice, but also kind of boring. Because here, by the hearth, every meal is earned. Every bite is built from fire, smoke and care. There's no timer to buzz, no microwave to ding, just that ancient stubborn dance of flame and pot. And somehow you think that might just taste better. The sun's almost down now, skimming the horizon, like it's too tired to climb back up tomorrow. The sky is that smoky purple-grey colour. That means bedtime is coming. Unless, of course, you've still got work to do, which you do. The fire is still holding on, stubborn and glowing like a lazy dragon in its cave. You poke at the coals with a stick and watch them pulse red, a rhythm as old as time. Tonight, your job is bread. Not the kind that comes sliced in plastic with cute little slogans on the bag. No preservatives. No dough conditioners. Just flour, water, salt and whatever yeast you can bully into cooperating, which to be fair is mostly guesswork. Because medieval bread isn't just food, it's survival, currency and occasionally a mild hazard. You reach for the small sack of flour in the corner. It's coarsely ground, uneven and dusty with little flecks of husk. That's normal. The village millstone isn't exactly precision engineered. Honestly, most of the flour has bits of stone ground into it too. You know this because your cousin lost a tooth on a loaf last spring. Not dramatic or anything, just as one of those things people say with a shrug. Ah, yes, the bread bit back. Still, even gritty bread is better than no bread. You dump some flour into a wooden bowl, add water from the pot, careful not to burn yourself, and mix it with your hands. The dough's sticky, cold and stubborn. You knead it anyway, pressing and folding until it fights back. No stand mixer, no timer, just your palms and a vague sense of how dough is supposed to feel. If you're lucky, you've got a leavening agent, a bit of sourdough starter kept alive from previous batches. If not, well, you're making flatbread. That's okay too. Plenty of people go flat on purpose, easier to cook, quicker to eat, and honestly, it doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. Flatbread is humble, flatbread is honest, your younger sister watches you knead, her fingers twitching like she wants to help but knows she'll mess it up. You let her sprinkle a pinch of salt in the bowl, and she grins like you've knighted her. In a way you have, kitchen duties are passed down like legend, one burnt crust at a time. You set the dough aside to rest. Technically, that's to let it rise. In reality, it's to give your arms a break and tend to the fire again. You rake the coals flat, clear a little space in the ashes, and line it with hot stones. That's your oven. If the weather were better, or if your village had a communal bakehouse, you might carry the dough down the lane to bake in a proper oven. But those are rare and mostly reserved for special occasions or for families that can afford the baker's fee. For the rest of you, it's hearth bread or no bread. Now here's the weird part. Your baking stone, the flat slab you place your dough on, has probably been passed down through generations. It's blackened from 1,000 fires, and it smells faintly of everything that's ever been cooked on it. Onion smoke, old butter, burnt bits. It's porous, flawed, and perfect. You brush it off with a rag and place it carefully in the coals. While you wait, you glance around your home. There's not much. The storage bin in the corner holds dried beans and barley. The rafters are still lined with drying herbs and maybe a few apples that haven't fully withered. A clay jar with milk sits in the coolest part of the room, wrapped in damp cloth to keep it from turning. Though let's be honest, it probably already has. That's okay. Curdled milk just becomes cheese if you pretend hard enough. You've got everything a medieval cook needs. And that's not a lot. People often imagine medieval bread as soft and fluffy, but most of the time it's dense, heavy, something between a biscuit and a brick. That's partly because of the flour, low gluten, badly milled, often mixed with other grains like rye or oats. But it's also just the way life is. Bread is fuel, not fluff. You eat it with stew to soak up the broth. You eat it with butter when you have it, or by itself when you don't. And sometimes, if the loaf is really stale, you use it as a trencher, a kind of edible plate to hold other food. In richer households, trenchers were common at feasts. Thick slices of bread served under meat and gravy, soaking up all the juices until they turned into an edible sponge. Afterward, you could eat them, or more often give them to the poor. You're not sure how you feel about that. Here, peasant, enjoy this meat-soggy bread plate. Gee, thanks, but trenchers were actually pretty practical. You've used one yourself. It's easier than washing a plate, which, again, you don't have. And after a long day of chasing chickens or hauling water, you don't care what your food comes on, as long as it's hot and you get enough of it. You check the fire. The stone is hot now, humming with potential. You flatten a ball of dough with your hands, dust it with a bit of flour to keep it from sticking, and slap it down on the stone. There's a hiss as it hits, and the smell starts to rise, nutty, warm, familiar. You cover it with a curved ceramic lid, a cloche, that traps the heat, turning the fire pit into a primitive oven. Not fancy, not fast, but it works. Here's your quirky historical nugget of the night. In some towns, bakers were required to mark their bread with a symbol, like a stamp or a slash in the dough, so if someone died from bad flour or improper baking, the authorities could track down who screwed up. Bread could kill you. If the grain was mouldy, if it had ergot fungus, if it was stored badly, you could hallucinate, seize or die. Some even believe whole villages were affected by mass poisonings, blamed on witches or demons when, really, it was just a rotten loaf. But not tonight. Your bread smells right. It's browning under the cloche, the edges crisping just enough. You lift the lid and flip it with a stick, watching it puff slightly from the heat. It's done when it feels done. You learn to trust your fingers, your nose, your ears. When it's finished, you pull it off the stone and set it on a folded cloth to cool. Not that you'll wait long. You tear off a corner and pop it into your mouth. It's chewy, warm, a little gritty, but it tastes like effort, like home. You pass it around and your siblings tear off pieces too. The dog whines, he gets a crumb. And for just a moment, it doesn't matter that the walls are smoke-stained, or that the roof leaks when it rains, or that tomorrow's meal isn't guaranteed. You've got bread, real bread, hot from the fire, made with your own hands. That's enough. The bread sits warm in your belly, and the last of the day's light is bleeding out through the cracks in the walls. The fire flickers low now, calm and steady, casting those slow-moving shadows across the floor that seem to breathe with you. You stretch your legs, brush crumbs from your lap, and glance at the pot again, the eternal pot. Because even though bread comes and goes, pottage is forever. You reach for the ladle, more of a carved wooden scoop really, and stir what's left in the cauldron. It's thicker now, congealed in places, with flecks of green and tiny bubbles blinking at the surface. It's not beautiful, but it's familiar. You don't even really think of it as a dish anymore. It's just there, always simmering, always ready. If bread is the bones of your meal, pottage is the blood, rich, hot, and always changing. Pottage isn't a recipe, it's a lifestyle. It's a culinary mood board made from desperation, luck, and whatever the forest or field or pantry handed you that day. Today it's oats, root vegetables, and a single tough piece of pork fat that somehow flavoured the whole pot. Tomorrow it might be nettles and beans. The day after that, barley and dried apple peel. There are no rules, no ratios, and certainly no measurements, just heat and hunger. You've heard of fancier stews, of course, manor kitchens making something they call ragout, packed with chunks of meat and aromatic herbs and real wine. But here, you make pottage with broth that's more memory than substance and ingredients that half the time you can't name. Once, someone tossed in a dried mushroom that turned the whole pot green. Nobody died, so it was declared a good mushroom. You never found another one like it. Pottage is democratic in a way few things are. Everyone eats it, rich or poor. It just looks very different depending on who's stirring the pot. At a noble's table, pottage might include imported spices and be thick with lamb, almonds, even saffron. Yes, saffron, the world's most expensive flower petal, and some lord somewhere is throwing it into soup like he's seasoning a roast chicken. Meanwhile, your pottage gets its zing from wild garlic and yesterday's onions. Still, you like yours better. It's got heart, it's got character, and when it's made right, it has a way of sticking to your ribs like armour. You swear sometimes you can feel it patching holes in your soul. Or maybe that's just the warmth. You ladle out a final portion into a small wooden bowl and place it near the fire for your father, who's still outside checking the livestock. He'll want something hot when he comes in. You drop a stale crust into the bowl, it softens in the broth, transforming from brick to sponge in seconds. That's another benefit of pottage. It rescues bad bread. The crusts that are too hard to chew become tender in the stew. The bits too dry for butter become little flavour bombs, soaking up whatever salt and fat you've managed to sneak in. There's a saying passed around your village: pottage cooks itself if you stir it enough. That's not really true, of course. Someone always has to mind the fire, gather the fuel, wash the vegetables, scrape the pot. But the idea is comforting, that the world could be so simple that food could just appear if you kept showing up. And here's something weird, but very real. People used to keep pottage going for days, even weeks at a time. A kind of slow-motion stew that never really ends, just changes. It's called perpetual stew now, but back then it didn't need a name. It was just dinner. Some historians even claim there were inn kitchens in France and Germany, where the pot never stopped simmering, with travellers dipping in for a bowl of history. Think about that, every bite, a blend of yesterday, last week, maybe last year. A culinary time machine. Of course, that also meant some unpleasant surprises. Bones that weren't completely cleaned, an old bit of fish that didn't get along with the lentils, the occasional pebble. You've had to spit those out more than once. Still better than going hungry. There's a debate among modern scholars, of course there is, about whether pottage was as universal as people think. Some argue it was more common in colder climates, where constant simmering kept homes warm and meals practical. Others insist that nearly every European household had some version of it, from the peasant's clay pot to the noble's silver cauldron. Either way, it's agreed. Pottage wasn't just food, it was culture, it was survival. It was a way to stretch little into enough. You turn your attention back to your pot. The fire's low but still warm. You'll bank it soon, pile ash over the coals to keep them smouldering till morning. But for now, the pottage will stay where it is, letting the flavours mingle, deepen, maybe turn into something new by sunrise. Your mother adds a pinch of salt, real salt, from a tiny pouch that's treated like treasure. Salt is precious, not just for flavour, but for health, for preservation, for trade. She gives the pot one last stir, then nods satisfied. You think of all the hands that have stirred this same pot. Your grandmother, your great-grandmother, maybe even someone whose name you've forgotten, but whose wooden spoon still hangs on the wall, darkened from years of use. Outside, the air grows colder. Your breath clouds in the doorframe as you step out briefly, stretching your back, watching the stars blink awake. It's quiet now, no animals, no chatter, just the crackling whisper of your hearth and the faint scent of stew drifting into the night. You go back in, settle near the fire, and wrap your cloak around your shoulders. The dog curls up beside you. You rest your head against the wall, the heat from the coals lulling you into a slow, steady drowse. The pottage gurgles once. Tomorrow it'll be breakfast. Morning comes in cold and quiet, the kind that makes your joints ache before you've even sat up. Your face is still sticky from the heat of the fire, but your toes are ice. You don't open your eyes yet, you don't have to. You already know the routine. Before the sun's fully climbed out of the bed, so have you. No choice. The fire needs feeding. The animals need tending. And your stomach? It's already growling, even though you know full well it's about to meet the exact same pottage you fell asleep listening to bubble last night. But today's not like every day. Not exactly, because today the pottage will taste different. Not because of some secret ingredient, but because today's a fast day. Ah yes. The medieval food calendar, a delicate dance choreographed entirely by the church. In this world, you don't just eat based on hunger or availability. You eat, or don't eat, based on a holy schedule so long and complicated it might as well be divine Sudoku. Today is one of those days. A Wednesday, or maybe Friday. You've lost track. Either way, that means no meat. The rules change depending on your location and denomination, but generally you fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, and all throughout Lent, and sometimes Advent, and maybe on the eve of this saint or the vigil of that one. The church calendar is full of days when food gets weird, or just less. So what does that mean for your pot? It means no pork fat, no broth from yesterday's scraps of ham, no sausage. Even though there's a sliver left hanging in the rafters, twisting gently in the updraft of smoke, it's off limits today. Instead, you reach for fish. Or more accurately, you hope there's fish. Salt cod maybe, dried herring, if you're unlucky, eel if you live near a river and someone got lucky with a trap. Your mother pulls a wrapped bundle from the corner of the pantry. It smells enthusiastic. A waft of brine and decay that hits you right in the sinuses. Yep, salt cod it is. She cuts a chunk off the slab, bone white and hard as wood, and drops it into a pot of water to soak. The kitchen instantly smells like the sea. But not the nice part of the sea, the part that eats ships. You might be grimacing now, but let's be honest. Salt cod is a miracle. This brick of fish has travelled miles, maybe all the way from the northern Atlantic, and stayed edible the whole time. That's impressive. It's been rubbed with so much salt that bacteria would need divine intervention to survive, but still it rehydrates. It softens. It even flakes when boiled right. It's not fun, but it's food, and on a fast day food is what counts. This cod will go into the pottage, replacing the richness of meat with something leaner, sharper, more austere, which feels appropriate. Because fasting isn't just about skipping food, it's about reminding yourself to be humble, to feel a little uncomfortable on purpose. As if your stomach's discomfort will somehow polish your soul. You stir the pot slowly, watching the broth turn cloudy with fish oil and herbs. No dairy either. Milk, butter, cheese, all of that's forbidden during the stricter fasts. You can see your little brother frowning. He doesn't care about doctrine. He just knows butter makes everything better. But rules are rules, and the church is watching even when you're not in it. Here's a curious historical nugget. The medieval church had an extremely creative definition of fish. Beavers? Fish. Porpoises? Also fish. Anything that lived in water could be argued into the fasting category, which tells you just how far people would go to work around holy guidelines while technically staying in bounds. You heard once that monks in France used to eat barnacle geese on fast days because they claimed the birds were born from driftwood and therefore qualified as seafood. Bold move. But you're not bold, not today. You stick with the cod while it simmers. Your neighbour stops by, again with a small pot of her own. Lentil stew made without meat, she says, but you can smell a hint of bacon in the mix. It's the medieval version of vegan, except for chicken stock. She trades it anyway, and your mother, with a knowing smile, doesn't ask questions. Fasting is technically a personal commitment. What goes in the pot and what doesn't. That's between you and, well, eternal judgment. The cod finally softens, its tough fibres giving way in the broth. You mash it a little with the back of the ladle, breaking it into flakes, mixing it with turnip and barley and those ever-present wild greens. You taste a spoonful. It's salty for sure, but not unpleasant. The kind of salt that lingers on the tongue and stays there, like a reminder. You add a bit of vinegar, if you have it, or sour beer if you don't. Anything to balance the bite. You serve the stew into bowls again, now familiar ritual, and the family gathers in silence. Fasting meals tend to be quieter, whether out of reverence or the general underwhelming flavour profile, you're not sure. Even the dog is subdued, sniffing the fishy broth with a sigh. This leads you to think about how food in this world isn't just fuel, it's identity, it's morality, it's political. It tells people what class you're in, what religion you follow, even what day of the week it is. And if you don't follow the rules, you risk more than a guilty conscience. In some places, breaking a fast could get you fined, or worse, shamed publicly. The priest in the next village once caught a boy eating lard on a Friday and made him confess in front of the entire congregation. Harsh. And yet, even with all these restrictions, people adapt. You do what you can, you find the loopholes, you get clever with seasoning, you ferment things, you dig out that one dried apple you've been saving for weeks and slice it into the pot for sweetness. That's the thing about medieval cooking, it's never just about surviving. It's about making do with grace. As the meal winds down, you scrape your bowl clean with another piece of that hearty brown bread and lean back, full but not stuffed. That's the fasting sweet spot. Just enough to keep working, not enough to forget your place in the cosmic order. Outside, the last light fades into blue, and someone down the road begins to sing. It's not a hymn, just a tune, a comfort. The fire crackles low again. and your father pours a bit of hot water into a mug of weak ale. Something like a tea if you squint. You close your eyes, not in prayer, but in quiet. Your hands still smell like salt, your breath fogs gently in the cold, and even though dinner was humble and meatless, you're warm, fed, and ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow might be a feast day, and then the pot gets interesting. The sun is just beginning to stretch itself over the rim of the horizon when you feel the first stirrings of excitement ripple through the village. There's a shift in the air, not just the promise of better weather or the smell of someone else's pottage, but something rarer. Celebration. Today is a feast day, one of the big ones. The kind where the priest actually smiles during Mass and people wear their second-best tunics instead of their usual ones patched beyond recognition. You can almost feel the church bells vibrating in your bones before they even ring. And you know what that means. Meat. Not salted, not dried, not fished or smoked or soaked for days in brine. Fresh meat. Possibly roasted, possibly stuffed, possibly even still dripping when it hits your plate. If you're lucky enough to be anywhere near the top of the social ladder, you're not. But even you can feel the ripple of hope in your belly that today's food might, just might, be something other than another humble ladle of pottage. On feast days, the entire rhythm of the kitchen shifts. Fire is stoked hotter, pots are cleaned, like actually cleaned, and every possible scrap of usable ingredient is dragged out from the pantry like a hidden treasure. The air itself thickens with anticipation and the scent of things that feel almost sinful. Dripping fat, spiced wine, roasted onions, maybe even a pie or two if someone really got ambitious. But here's the thing. Food preparation on feast days isn't relaxed. It's chaos wearing a festive hat. The kitchen, or what passes for it, is a mess of clanking, boiling, shouting, and more than one person burning themselves because someone else forgot to move the iron pot hook. You're right in the middle of it, elbow deep in blood and lard, helping butcher a goose that your uncle brought in before sunrise. It flaps once, reflects reflexively, and you don't flinch this time. You're used to it now. Your job is to hold the bowl while your uncle bleeds it out. The blood will be saved for sausage or pudding. Nothing gets wasted. Not on a feast day. You've already got a bundle of herbs waiting. Sage, marjoram, parsley, all crushed and drying above the hearth. They're going into something, you're not even sure what yet. The goose is plucked, singed over the fire to remove the last of the feathers, and then split open for cleaning. The guts go into one pot, the fat gets rendered in another. The kitchen becomes a factory of smells. Warm, savoury, thick citric smells that feel like indulgence itself. You don't even realise you're humming until someone tells you to shut up and pass the salt. Now comes the roasting. You rig a spit over the fire, just 2 green sticks forked at the top and a long pole running through the goose's cavity. It's not elegant, but it works. The fat starts dripping almost immediately, sizzling as it hits the fire and sending up a sharp hiss that makes everyone's mouths water. Even the dog, who's been unusually well behaved all morning. Probably planning his own feast under the table later. Someone's already baking bread in the cloche oven, and your older cousin is working dough into hand-sized rounds for quick cakes that can be fried directly on stones. You want to say something snarky about her technique, but she's been at it since dawn and probably has flour in places flour should never be. So you keep your thoughts to yourself. Here's a strange little historical nugget for you. During medieval feast days, it wasn't just the food that was elevated. The very act of cooking became a kind of performance. In noble homes, cooks might construct edible castles out of pastry, or serve peacocks with their feathers reattached after roasting, so they looked alive. Swans, too, regal birds with plumage so white it seemed fake, cooked and displayed like centerpieces on royal tables. You, of course, have never seen this, but you've heard tales. Someone once claimed a bishop's feast involved a roast hedgehog stuffed with almonds. Why? No one knows. But you admire the creativity. Back in your world, the goose is turning over the fire now, basted with a mix of fat and herbs, each turn squeaking as the spit settles into its notch. You're responsible for the turning. It's boring and critical. Let it sit too long on one side and it'll burn. Turn too quickly and it won't brown. You settle into the rhythm, turning with the fire's breath, watching the skin go golden, blistered, perfect. The scent wraps around the room like a warm, greasy blanket. Everyone's eyes keep drifting toward it, but no one dares sneak a bite, yet. Meanwhile, there's another pot. Of course there is, bubbling over the coals. This one's fancier than usual, lentils, onions. Maybe even a bit of wine someone stole from the priest's cellar. Don't ask, don't tell. It's meant to go with the meat, not instead of it. A rare treat. You stir it gently, careful not to let it stick. You've come too far to ruin it now. There's this ongoing academic squabble about whether medieval peasants truly experienced these kinds of feasts, or if it was mostly a noble indulgence trickling down in stories. But the consensus? Yeah, they did. Not every week, not even every month. But religious holidays, harvest festivals, saints' days, they brought out the best of what people had. Whole villages would pool their resources for a shared meal. One pig might feed 20 families if you ration it right. And let's not forget, the church expected you to celebrate. Joy was a form of devotion too. Your mother comes in with a basket of something incredible, fresh apples and late-season plums from the manor orchard. A gift or a tithe payment, you're not sure. Either way, they're real fruit. Not dried, not wormy, shiny, juicy, alive. She cuts the plums into wedges and drops them into a pan with a splash of vinegar and a pinch of sugar hoarded for weeks. She's making a compote. You didn't even know she remembered how. By now, the goose is ready. You pull it from the spit carefully, lay it on the cutting board, again more of a flat stone, and begin carving. The juices run clear, the skin crackles. You slice thick slabs of dark meat, pass them around on rough wooden trenchers, and resist the urge to hoard an extra piece. Everyone gets some, even the dog. He's earned it. You eat with your fingers. No forks, of course. Just greasy fingers, shared bread, and laughter that feels warmer than the fire. Even the lentils taste like a miracle. For a moment, no one talks. They just chew, savour, relish the feeling of not just being fed, but being full. Later, when the bones have been picked clean and the fat has been rendered into jars for future days, you sit back and listen to the fire crackle. Outside, the stars blink into view. Someone sings again. This time you join in. Today was a feast day, and you lived it. The warmth of the feast still lingers in your bones the next morning, like a pleasant ache after a long run. The hearth is quiet now, just a soft crumble of embers under grey ash, but the room still smells faintly of goose fat and lentils and joy. You sit cross-legged near the hearth with a piece of cold bread in your hand and the rare feeling of being not hungry. A dangerous luxury, really, because that fullness won't last. Not in a world where food is never promised, and preservation is less science and more ancient guessing game. That's your task today, preserving what's left, making the feast last. You've got a few slices of meat wrapped in linen and a dish of rendered fat. There's also the bone, clean and hollowed out by your family's 10 fingers, destined for the next broth. Waste is not an option. You don't toss anything that might one day taste like food again. And preservation? That's where things get tricky. In a world without refrigerators, ice boxes, or even cold cellars unless you're lucky enough to live near a cave, keeping food edible means fighting nature with nature. You start with salt, or rather, what's left of the salt. It lives in a little cloth bag, stored high on a shelf like treasure. Because it is Sid's treasure. Not gold, not jewels, but in many ways more valuable. Salt keeps death at bay. It dries meat, stops rot, keeps bad smells from turning worse. You rub it into the goose meat now, hands stiff from the cold. Every grain matters. This isn't about flavour. This is about survival. You wrap the meat again, tighter this time, then place it in the cool corner of the house, farthest from the fire. That'll buy you a day, maybe 2, but for longer storage you'll need more fire, you'll need smoke. Out behind the house, your uncle has already started assembling the smokehouse. That's a generous term. It's really just 4 posts, a crossbeam, and some old wool blankets to trap the haze. He builds it every season, tears it down when it's not needed. Meat hangs from hooks, or is tied with twine, slowly drying in the heat. You help arrange the wood pile, alder, birch, a bit of applewood for flavour. The fire must burn low and slow, more smoulder than flame. You're not cooking the meat, you're transforming it, making it inhospitable to everything but hunger. As you stack the logs, you think of all the ways people tried to cheat time in this era. Smoking, salting, drying, pickling. They all worked, in their own frustrating, fragile ways. You've dried apples on strings over the hearth. You've soaked vegetables in brine so sour it curled your eyebrows. You've packed fish in clay and left it under rocks by the stream, hoping cold water and luck would keep it fresh. That one didn't go well. But smoking is the most reliable of them all. It's labour-intensive, sure, but the results are dependable. The meat darkens, tightens, and takes on the flavour of the fire. It becomes hard, chewy, slightly greasy, and that's exactly what you want. You hang the meat, step back, and watch the smoke curl around it like a blessing. The scent is rich, earthy, and oddly comforting. Somewhere between campfire and kitchen, you can almost hear the fat whispering as it sizzles. Back inside, your mother's started working on the cheese. Not the creamy, smooth kind you find in a store. This is peasant cheese. Sour milk strained through cloth, left to sit just long enough to curdle into something vaguely spreadable. Add salt, maybe some herbs if you're feeling bold, and press it into a wooden mould, then leave it, and hope it doesn't attract flies. You help by hanging the cloth from a beam and letting the whey drip into a bucket. It's slow, a meditative kind of task. And the smell? Let's just say it's not for everyone, but cheese lasts longer than milk, and every village has its own style. Some hard, some soft, some that smell like someone buried a boot and then ate it anyway. You've tried them all, you'll eat them all again. Here's a fringe fact that might surprise you. In some parts of Europe, people preserved eggs by dipping them in lime water or coating them with fat. Others packed them in ashes or buried them in grain bins to keep them cool and dark. You've seen your mother rub butter on fresh eggs and tuck them into straw-lined baskets. It works, most of the time. Then there's the sun. Not today, it's too cold, but in warmer months, the sun is your oven and your friend. You've dried plums, herbs, and strips of meat on wooden racks, flipping them every few hours and swatting away flies with a willow branch. It's a race against time and bugs. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn that maggots move faster than you'd think. Scholars still debate how much the average peasant knew about microbial spoilage. Did they understand why food rotted? Or did they just accept it as fate? You're not sure. Nobody talks about bacteria around the fire. But you do know which storage tricks work, and which ones end with a gut ash that keeps you squatting behind the house for half a day. There's a kind of sixth sense you develop. A sniff, a taste, a texture that says eat this now, or bury this before it walks away. And sometimes, in the leanest weeks, you roll the dice anyway. By late afternoon, the smokehouse is doing its job and the cheese is set to rest. You wrap it in cloth and tuck it near the bread bin, which is really just a cool nook in the wall. You check the pot, yes, the same pot, where the bones from yesterday's feast have been simmering with barley and onions. The broth is thick, golden, shimmering with a sheen of leftover fat. That's dinner. It always is. You sit near the hearth again, hands raw from salt and ash, body tired in that satisfying used-up way. You glance at the hanging herbs, the cooling bread, the meat slowly darkening outside. There's not much food in the house, but what's here, it'll last. Preservation isn't a skill here. It's a mindset, a lifestyle. You learn to stretch, to savour, to store like every meal might be your last good one for a while, because it might. But tonight, at least, the pot smells like promise, and that's something worth holding on to. The morning fog is clinging to the fields like an old wool blanket, heavy and damp, soaking into your boots before you've even made it past the door. You squint against the cold as you trudge toward the chicken coop, or what passes for one, a wobbly enclosure made of rough-hewn planks and enough gaps to let in the wind, but hopefully not the fox. You pull your cloak tighter and listen. No clucking. Not yet. You knock on the side of the coop anyway, like you're politely asking them to wake up. Eventually there's the soft rustle, then a chorus of low, sleepy grumbles. Eggs. You're here for eggs. Not because it's breakfast time, remember that word is still a bit of an overstatement in the Middle Ages, but because eggs are precious, and everyone counts, and lately the hens have been stingy. Maybe it's the cold, or maybe they're just in a mood. Either way, production is down, and eggs aren't something you take for granted. Not anymore. You reach under the first hen gently, you're no amateur, and come away with a single warm egg. A miracle. The other nests, empty, except one with something unidentifiable that you don't want to talk about. You tuck the egg into your pouch and head back to the house, boots squelching through muddy frost. Back inside, the fire's been coaxed into life again, and your mother's already pouring the dregs of yesterday's broth into a pan. You offer the egg like a prize, and she takes it with a soft smile, then cracks it directly into the bubbling mix. Just one egg, but it's enough to give the soup body, richness, enough to make it feel like a meal instead of just hot water with ideas. That's the thing about eggs. They're small, but they're magic. They bind dough, thicken sauces, enrich pastries, and stand on their own when nothing else will. When you have a few, the possibilities multiply. Custards, tarts, soft-boiled over bread, even fried flat on a hot stone with a little fat if you're feeling decadent. But when you've only got one, you treat it like gold. You savour it, you share it, Or sometimes you don't. It's easier to forget. In your modern world of supermarket shelves and reusable egg cartons, how fragile the medieval egg supply really is. Hens lay when they feel like it, and winter makes them moody. They're sensitive to cold, light, noise and stress. A predator lurking near the coop can spook them into silence for days. Feed them poorly, no eggs. Move them, no eggs. Breathe near them the wrong way, no eggs. And then there's the matter of the hens themselves. Most households don't keep them for very long. Once a hen stops laying, she becomes soup. Simple as that. There's no retirement plan for poultry, so the flock is constantly shifting old birds out and new chicks in. You've watched it happen. Held the tiny fuzzy warmth of a newborn chick in one hand and helped pluck the feathers from a stew-ready old-timer with the other. Milk, eggs and tutudul game. These are your kitchen's quiet heroes. They're not flashy. They don't hang above the fire in grand cuts or show up on feast day platters, but they keep you alive, especially dairy. If your household is lucky enough to have a cow, or more likely a goat, you get milk, not much, and not year-round, but enough. Today the milk has been sitting in a clay jar near the hearth, wrapped in a damp cloth to keep it coolish. It's starting to separate, which is actually perfect. Plus, that means curds, that means fresh cheese. Your sister stirs it with a wooden spoon, gently folding the solids into a soft lump, while the whey collects at the bottom. Later she'll press it, salt it, and hide it in the corner with the rest. But right now it's fresh, warm, and still edible. You scoop a bit with bread and eat it standing, fingers sticky, eyes closing in a quiet moment of gratitude. And yet, despite the effort it takes to get any of this, there are still strict rules about who eats what. It's not just about religion anymore, it's about hierarchy. This is where things start to feel unfair, because while you're scraping a single egg into a broth and stretching goat milk into butter by churning it in a goat bladder, yes, that's a thing, your local lord is feasting on 6-course meals with cream-rich sauces and baked custards stuffed with nutmeg and saffron. He doesn't wonder whether the hens have laid today. He doesn't count eggs like coins. There's this assumption that everyone had access to basic foodstuffs like eggs and milk. But historical records, especially manorial rolls, tell a different story. Some peasants had so little surplus that even selling eggs was off the table. Others were forbidden by custom or law to hunt or keep livestock freely. Sometimes the best milk and the best eggs were demanded as payment in kind, tithes to the church, dues to the Lord, or offerings during holidays. And when illness swept through the flock or the cow stopped producing, you couldn't just fix the problem. You waited, you bartered, you begged. Your grandmother once traded a wool shawl for a pot of fresh cream during Lent, not because she needed it, but because the baby wouldn't stop crying, and goat milk was the only thing softer than mother's milk. You remember that story because it ended with her boiling the cream into something thick, almost like porridge, and letting the baby suck it off her fingers. The baby survived. The shawl didn't. Not all stories end that well. There's also a curious fringe detail you heard once, maybe from a passing traveller or a half-drunk monk. In some places, people used to bury eggs in ash or lime to preserve them, not like a dozen at a time, but one by one layered in wood ash inside clay jars stored in cool places. You're not sure if it works. You tried it once. The result was interesting. Let's just say no one asked for seconds. By late morning, the egg-enhanced soup is gone, the goat has been milked again, yielding just enough for a mugful, and the hens are back to pecking around the coop like they've never withheld anything in their lives. You gather a few greens for dinner, young mustard leaves, a few wild sorrel, and tuck them into your apron. The fire's been steady all morning. You add a few small branches, adjusting the pot so it stays just warm enough. The pot's empty now, but it won't be for long. You've got bones to simmer, milk to warm, maybe a little cheese to melt into something. There's always something to make, even when there's nothing. You glance at the rafters. One of the hanging jars is clinking gently in the breeze, a reminder that somewhere up there a small ball of butter is waiting to be unwrapped. Maybe for tomorrow, maybe for something better. For now, you've got smoke in your hair, warmth in your belly, and a single egg's memory dancing on your tongue. It's enough. You're elbow deep in firewood ash and goat hair when the scent hits you, sharp, peppery, and completely out of place in your kitchen. It cuts through the usual haze of smoke and stew like a dagger in butter, and your stomach reacts before your brain does. That smell doesn't belong to anything you've ever grown. It doesn't come from the herb garden or the foraging basket. No, that's the scent of faraway lands. That's spice. You glance around and spot it. A small ceramic jar tucked near the back of the storage shelf, almost hidden beneath a folded cloth and some cobwebs. You reach for it, hands still dusty, and when you lift the lid, the scent intensifies. It's pepper. Real pepper. Black and hot and fragrant, not mustard seed. Not horseradish, the real thermoring, and not even mouldy. Your mother must have been hoarding it. A pinch here and there, saved from some old trade or gift, or maybe even the black market generosity of a travelling monk. You don't ask. In this house, secrets are fine as long as they taste good. You dip your finger in and touch a bit to your tongue. It burns, not in a painful way, but in a way that makes you sit up straighter, like your taste buds just woke up from a long nap. It's wildly unfair, honestly. A spice this tiny, this strange, able to make a pot of vegetables taste like something royal. Because let's be clear, spices in the Middle Ages were ridiculously valuable. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, these weren't just flavour boosters. They were currency, power, wealth you could eat. A handful of peppercorns could buy a lamb. A whole pouch might pay your taxes. And yet, somehow there's a jar of it sitting in your kitchen, and you're about to cook with it. You toss a small pinch into the stew that's bubbling over the fire. It's the usual mix: barley, beans, leeks, a few turnips, all solid, familiar, humble. But now, with pepper curling its aroma into the broth, it becomes exotic. Not rich exactly, but layered. Like something a travelling merchant might serve in a tent under foreign stars. It makes you feel worldly, even though the farthest you've ever gone is the edge of the next village. You stir slowly, watching the surface shimmer. This pot is the same one your great-grandmother used. It's been repaired 3 times, and you know where the bottom is thinner, where food sticks first, where to stir harder. But it's never held anything like this. It feels like magic, even if it's just flavour. And that's no accident. Spices had their own mythology in the medieval world. Pepper was believed to be guarded by dragons in India. Cinnamon was said to grow on cliffs so steep that only giant birds could retrieve it. These weren't just luxury goods, they were wrapped in stories, half-truths, and sacred whispers. Spices were mysterious, almost divine, and people would kill for them, literally. You remember a merchant who passed through last spring, cartwheels squeaking, offering tiny packets wrapped in oilcloth. He claimed to have saffron, but it was probably marigold petals soaked in vinegar. You didn't have anything worth trading, but you remember the way your mother's eyes lit up just hearing the names. Clove, ginger, mace, words like spells. Here's your quirky fringe detail of the day. Back then, pepper was so prized that people sometimes used it as rent. A whole term existed, peppercorn rent, where tenants paid their lords in spices instead of silver. It sounds silly now, but if you've ever tried to swallow a bowl of boiled oats without salt or spice, you'll understand the logic. Flavour was power. And the trade routes? Oh, the trade routes were a spider web stretching across continents. Pepper came from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, nutmeg from the Moluccas, places most people in your world had never heard of, let alone seen. Yet here it is, sitting in your pot, riding steam into your nostrils, making barley taste like something from a feast. Of course, there's also a dark side to it all. Wars were fought over spice, fortunes were made and stolen, entire nations would rise and fall chasing the promise of pungency. And while the rich bathe their meals in saffron and sugar, you're here rationing out 1 pinch of black pepper like it's the last candle before nightfall. You pull the pot from the fire and let it cool just a bit. The scent is thicker now, earthy, warm and unfamiliar. You ladle out the stew and pass it around. Nobody asks what's in it. They just eat. But one by one, heads turn. Chewing slows, brows furrow, then a few glances in your direction. Did you do something? Your sister asks, mouth full. You shrug. Just stirred. She squints at you but keeps eating. Even the dog licks his bowl longer than usual. This moment, the strange joy of flavour in an otherwise flavourless world, makes you think about how much of cooking is emotional. It's not just about feeding bellies, it's about making people pause, smile, remember. Spices are a shortcut to that, a way of time travelling through your tongue. But that raises a question scholars still debate. Did medieval peasants actually use spices, or is that just wishful thinking, retroactively romanticising their lives? Some argue only the wealthy had access, that spices were locked away in castle kitchens and monastic stores. Others point to household records showing tiny, irregular purchases of pepper or cumin by common folk, suggesting that even the poor occasionally got a taste of the wider world. Maybe not daily, maybe not even monthly, but sometimes, and today, in your kitchen, is one of those times. You tuck the spice jar back into its hiding place. There's hardly any left, but that's fine. Half the magic is knowing it's there. Like a secret ingredient for a day when everything else feels grey. As the meal ends, you catch your mother watching you with a look you can't quite read. Pride? Maybe. Or maybe that she knows you found her secret jar and is just waiting for the right moment to ask what else you've been sneaking. The fire crackles softly. The bowls are mostly empty, scraped clean with the bits of bread. You're full, not just in your belly, but in your chest. Because sometimes, even in a smoky, muddy, freezing medieval kitchen, you can cook something that reminds people the world is bigger than their field and warmer than their hearth. All it takes is a pinch. You're crouched by the fire again, chewing slowly, carefully, because there's no telling what's going to be in your next bite. Something hard, something soft, something questionable. You're holding your trencher in one hand, a thick slab of stale bread acting as both plate and sponge, and a small dull eating knife in the other. There's no fork. There never is. Forks are for Italians and dukes with money to waste. You, like everyone else in your village, eat with your hands and occasionally your knife. And when you're done, the trencher gets eaten too if it's still edible. If not, tossed to the dog, or to someone poorer than you if that's possible. You tear a bite from a hunk of boiled turnip and swipe it through the thick stew that's pooled in the middle of your trencher. It's good, hearty, hot, salty, but every few seconds you crunch something a little too hard. Grit, probably from the grinding stone. That happens a lot. See, your flour is milled in the village with big circular stones, and those stones wear down. Tiny pieces end up in the flour. That means your bread doubles as a dental challenge. You know more than one grown adult with only half a mouthful of teeth. And it's not because of sugar, it's because of bread. Still, you eat it, you have to eat it. Food doesn't get tossed because it's crunchy or weird or vaguely alarming. As long as it's not green and crawling, it goes in your mouth. That's the rule. Across the fire from you, your cousin is gnawing on a bone like a caveman, which frankly is pretty accurate. There's no plate in front of him, just a pile of onion skins and a puddle of broth that's soaking into the dirt floor. He wipes his mouth with the back of his sleeve and then promptly wipes his hand on the dog. The dog looks thrilled. You glance around your house, or more accurately, your one-room universe. It's dinner time, though no one has a clock, and it could just as easily be late lunch. Doesn't matter, you're eating, and that's what makes it dinner. Let's talk about table manners for a second, because yes, they do exist in the Middle Ages, just not quite the way you're imagining. You've been told not to belch too loud or pick your teeth with your knife while someone else is speaking. You're supposed to keep your elbows off the table, even if the table is a board laid across two barrels. But mostly the etiquette revolves around sharing. Because that's what medieval dining is, communal. You share everything. You share bowls, knives, bread, meat. The one decent cup that isn't cracked. There's no such thing as personal space. You and your neighbour might be dipping your bread into the same puddle of gravy, and it's just understood that you keep it civil. No double dipping. Don't use your fingers to fish out chunks. And if you sneeze, aim for the dog, or the floor. Definitely not the food. Your knife is your best friend. You bring it with you everywhere. It hangs from your belt, dull but dependable, used for everything from eating to carving to occasionally cleaning out your fingernails. There are no spoons unless you've made your own, or borrowed one. You made yours from wood 2 winters ago. It's got a weird bend and a crack near the bowl, but it still scoops, mostly. Plates, as you know them, don't exist in your house. Nobles might have pewter or silver, or even ceramic if they're showing off. You've seen wooden platters at the manor, smooth and round, sometimes with little grooves carved in to catch juice. But here, it's trenchers all the way. That day-old slab of coarse bread, that's your dish. When it gets too soggy, you eat it. When it gets too stale, you toss it. But for a few glorious minutes, it's both surface and sponge. Here's a fun little detail that's both fascinating and slightly gross. In wealthier homes, especially during feasts, trenchers weren't always eaten by the diners. Instead, they were collected after the meal and given to the poor. Charity, sure, but also practical. Why waste food plate hybrids when they can serve double duty? Imagine being so rich that even your leftovers have leftovers. You take another bite of your meal, this one less crunchy, and wash it down with a sip from the shared cup. It's ale, weak and warm, with the slight tang of something that was almost vinegar, and then changed its mind. Everyone drinks it, even the kids. Not because you're trying to party, but because water isn't exactly reliable. Wells go bad, streams carry disease. But ale? Ale is boiled, fermented, safer. That's the logic. That's the gamble. You hand the cup to your little brother, who sloshes half of it down his front. Nobody flinches. That's just Tuesday. Let's take a moment to address hands. Medieval hands, because they're not clean. Yours right now are covered in ash, crumbs, and maybe something that dripped from the stew earlier. You wipe them on your tunic before eating, but that doesn't do much. Soap exists, but it's harsh. Animal fat and lye. And you mostly use it for laundry, not skin. So yeah, you're eating with hands that have touched firewood, goats, and whatever was in the back corner of the pantry that you really hope wasn't moving. Does it gross you out? Not really. You're used to it. Everyone is. Germ theory won't arrive for centuries, and even then people will argue about it. For now, you just hope the heat from the stew kills whatever's lurking under your fingernails. There's a quiet debate among historians about whether medieval peasants truly lacked hygiene, or if our modern assumptions are a little skewed. Some claim people were cleaner than we give them credit for, bathing regularly, scrubbing with sand and herbs, using designated eating cloths. Others insist the average meal was basically a bacteria buffet. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. You do your best. You rinse your hands in the wash basin when you remember. You avoid the green bread, and you only pick food off the floor if no one's watching. As the meal wraps up, everyone leans back from the hearth a little, bowls empty, trenchers either eaten or flung to the dog. There's no dessert unless someone found an apple that hasn't gone soft, no coffee, no after-dinner mint, just the warmth of the fire and the brief quiet of full bellies. You lick your fingers, wipe them on your tunic again and smile. Not because it was a fancy meal, but because you're not hungry anymore. That's as good as it gets. And as for the manners, they might be rough around the edges, but there's a kind of grace in this chaos, a rhythm, a shared understanding that you're all in this together. Dirty hands, broken spoons, chewy bread, and all. You don't have to look out the window to know the Lord's table is being set. You can smell it in the air, roasting meat, sweet spices, the unmistakable scent of wealth on four. It drifts down from the manor like perfume on the wind, slipping past thatched roofs and open doors, reminding everyone exactly where they stand. You chew your breakfast bread, hard, cold, yesterday's, and try not to think about the boar roasting just up the hill. It's a feast day again, or maybe the Lord just feels like celebrating. That's the thing about people with power. They don't need a reason. Someone might have arrived. Someone might have died. Maybe it's just Thursday. Whatever it is, the great hall is bustling, servants running back and forth with trays and baskets and jugs, and the kitchen up there is likely a storm of clanging pans and shouted Latin. Meanwhile, down here, in your little corner of the village, things are quieter. The fire is low, the stew is thin, and the bread has gone from rustic to chew with caution. You're stirring the morning pot with one hand and swatting flies with the other, wondering how the other half eats so much, and so differently, because the difference between your food and theirs isn't just portion size, it's everything. Ingredients, preparation, presentation. Where you boil, they roast. Where you slice a turnip and call it vegetables, they create layered pastries filled with almond paste and dates. Where you stretch one egg across a meal for 6, they whip 12 into a custard and dust it with sugar like it grew on trees. You've seen it before, not often. But once or twice you've been called to the manor to help with deliveries or clean up, and you've glimpsed the aftermath of a lord's dinner. Platters carved from pewter and glazed with meat drippings, fruit scattered like jewels, bones with just enough meat left to mock your own bony broth. The cooks there wear aprons that look clean and speak of recipes as if they're magic spells. They talk about courses and pairings, while you're just hoping your pottage doesn't curdle. You remember one particular time during harvest when you helped in the manor scullery. You weren't allowed near the main table, God forbid your muddy boots offend the carpet, but you caught glimpses. The Lord's table was long, polished, and loud with laughter. There were pies shaped like animals, stuffed with meat and herbs and dyed with saffron to look even more unnatural. You heard talk of swan. Meanwhile, you were in the back scraping soot from the underside of a pan with a twig and being scolded for breathing too loud. That's when you learned that lords don't eat crusts, they eat the middle. The white, soft part of bread you rarely see. Their loaves are made from fine, sifted flour, bolted flour, where all the grit and bran has been removed. It's snow-white, fluffy, and so rare it almost feels fake. Yours? Brown, coarse, and packed with so much texture your teeth hurt just looking at it. You can't help but wonder, if the crust is the only part you've ever known, what does the middle taste like? It's not just about taste either. It's about control. who eats what, when and why, because technically the food from the Lord's estate is grown on land that's his. Even the hens in your yard, the apples on your tree, the wheat you help harvest, none of it's truly yours. You're allowed to use it, until he says otherwise. You don't own food, you rent it. And there are rules. So many rules. On feast days, the Lord's table gets meat and wine and buttery sauces, while you're expected to give a portion of your harvest as tax or tithe. During Lent, when you're stretching your dried beans and swearing off milk, the manna just switches to fish, imported and fried and served rouleaued with greens. You've heard rumours they even had almond milk to get around the dairy ban. That's the kind of loophole you can afford when you have a full pantry and someone else to do the math. Your little sister asks if she can have more stew. There's not much left, but you ladle a small scoop into her bowl anyway. She doesn't notice the lack of meat. She's still young enough to think rich means having 2 blankets instead of 1. There's a scholarly debate that floats around from time to time, mostly among those who've never missed a meal in their lives, about whether medieval peasants ate poorly. Some argue your diet is actually more nutritious than the Lord's. More grains, more greens, less indulgence. They talk about fibre and vitamins like it's a competition. You've even heard that nobles suffered from diseases caused by too much meat, too much sugar, and sure, there's truth in that. But there's also this. No one wants to be healthy if it means being hungry all the time. Back at the manor, the music has started. You hear it faintly, harp strings and flutes, and maybe the stomping of boots on polished floors. You can almost smell the roasted bird again. Maybe peacock today, or capon, or pigeon stuffed with almonds. Something unnecessary. Your own pot hisses gently over the fire. Inside, barley, cabbage, and a few foraged mushrooms that hopefully aren't the bad kind. You stir it gently and try not to resent the music, or the meat, or the wine, because you know something else too, something that evens the scale a bit. The Lord doesn't know how to cook. He doesn't know how to bake bread or fix a cracked pot or stretch a meal across a week. He doesn't know the feeling of scraping the last of the fat from a pan and turning it into a miracle. He eats, yes, but he doesn't feed. Not the way your mother does. Not the way you do now, ladling out another bowl for your sister, wiping your hands on your apron, tending the fire like it's your own little son. That knowledge, it's not power exactly, but it's something better. It's yours. You're pouring yourself a cup of ale that looks like dishwater and smells like wet bread. And honestly, that's just what you were hoping for. Because in the Middle Ages, drinking water is a gamble, and you're not feeling particularly lucky today. The stream nearby runs clear most days, but clear doesn't mean clean. There's always the chance something upstream has died, rotted, or relieved itself with reckless abandon. So you don't drink water straight unless you have to. You drink ale. Not the kind of ale you're thinking of. Nothing cold, nothing bubbly, and certainly nothing you'd pay 10 coins for at a tavern. This ale is weak, cloudy, and barely alcoholic. You brew it at home, in small batches, with barley that's been mashed, boiled, strained, and fermented, just enough to make it safe. They call it small beer, and it's less about getting drunk and more about not dying from dysentery. You sip it, lukewarm, and feel the familiar mild burn at the back of your throat. Not refreshing exactly, but better than the alternative. Even the children drink it. That's how normal it is. Your little brother's first words might as well have been, "More ale, please." The brewing bucket sits by the fire, wrapped in cloth to keep it warm during fermentation. It's not fancy, just a big wooden tub with a cracked lid and a sour smell that seems to have claimed a permanent place in the kitchen air. You lean over it, sniff, and decide it's ready for the next step, straining. You grab a cloth sack, formerly a shirt sleeve if we're being honest, and begin pouring the mixture through, catching the grainy mash and letting the murky liquid drain into a jug. This is your second batch this month. The first one came out too thin and tasted like sadness. But this one smells like it might actually do the job. You stir the last of the sediment with a stick and leave it to settle. Your neighbour pops in without knocking, nobody knocks, and sets down a basket of sprouted barley. "Trade?" she asks, already eyeing your jug. You nod and hand over a small clay mug for her to taste. She sips, grimaces, then nods. Better than last time. High praise. You trade her a jug of the stuff for a bundle of onions and a half loaf of bread, and suddenly the day's looking up. The ale's doing its job, feeding the family and feeding the barter system. It's strange to think how important this drink is, not just for survival, but for social glue. People gather around ale, work breaks for it, arguments start over it, deals are sealed with it. And while lords and monks drink wine, imported, expensive, often hoarded, the peasants drink what they brew. Ale is the great equalizer. Unless you're the one trying to brew it properly in the middle of a rainy week with mould creeping into the grain sacks. You remember your mother teaching you how to brew, how to spot the bubbles of a healthy fermentation, how to cool the mash just enough without killing the wild yeasts. She didn't call them yeasts, of course. She called them spirits. And maybe she wasn't wrong. You've seen what happens when they go bad. The ale turns sour, flat or worse, explosive. You lost a jug that way last spring. The cap burst clean off and painted the wall with beer sludge. The dog wouldn't go near it for days. There's a long-running argument among scholars about just how central ale was to medieval life. Some argue people drank it constantly because the water was so dangerous. Others believe it wasn't that universal, that people drank more water than we think, and that ale was mostly reserved for special occasions or those who could afford the grain. You're not a scholar, but your pantry's empty more often than not. And yet the ale pot keeps bubbling. That says something. You sip again, still warm, still gritty, but with a comforting yeasty bite. You imagine a world where drinks are cold and come with little fruit slices on the rim. Then you remember that in this world cold drinks are punishment. They chill the stomach, upset the humours, and probably make you susceptible to ghosts or something. You'll take warm ale, thanks. Occasionally someone in the village makes cider or mead. Those are treats. Apple cider is rare, too many apples needed, and most of them go toward drying or eating. Mead is even rarer because honey is precious. The village beekeeper guards her hives like they're gold mines, and every spoonful of honey she parts with is either for the church or the dying. But ale, is yours. You grow the barley, you stir the mash, you wait, you strain, you hope. And when it's good, it tastes like ownership. You pour another cup and carry it outside, where your father is mending a fence with one hand and swatting flies with the other. You hand him the cup, and he grunts thanks, then takes a long sip. He doesn't smile, but his shoulders relax. That's approval enough. Later, as the sun dips low and the meal begins, thin stew again with your new onions, you pass the jug around the fire. Everyone drinks, everyone sighs. The dog tries to sneak a lick but gets nudged away. There's no toasting, no clinking of cups, just the quiet recognition that this drink, this slightly sour, slightly sweet, slightly weird cup of ale, is keeping you alive, keeping you sane, and keeping the conversation just a little looser than it was before. You top off your mug and lean back against the wall listening to your brother tell some ridiculous story about a goat in the grain bin. It's not even funny, but you laugh anyway, because tonight the ale is good, the stew didn't burn, and for once nobody's coughing. It's not a feast, but it's a moment. And in a world where comfort is rare and health is fickle, a good brew shared around the fire feels like a blessing, even if it still tastes vaguely like old bread. You wake to bells, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The monastery is calling the brothers to prayer, and that means it's nearly sunrise. You blink in the dimness of your little house, surrounded by familiar smells, ash, old bread, damp wool, but your mind is already elsewhere, up on the hill where stone walls rise like ancient ribs from the earth, and monks are stirring from their hard straw beds to begin another day of divine routine. You're not a monk, of course, but you've been up there before, just a few times. Once to deliver firewood, another time to help repair the herb garden after a winter frost. And what you remember most clearly, the food, not the volume of it, necessarily, but the order of it, the rhythm, the odd sacred quiet that surrounds a monastic kitchen. In your house, food is chaos. It's fire and smoke and grabbing before it's gone. But in the monastery, it's a kind of ritual, like everything else they do. And today you've been sent there again, with a basket of leeks and 3 eggs, a peace offering in exchange for salve for your cousin's foot, which may or may not be rotting. You walk up the narrow path just as the sky begins to lighten, and the gates open with a creak that feels far too formal for your little offering. Inside, the kitchen is already warm, not bustling, not loud, but warm, orderly. A fire crackles under a large stone hood, and a pot simmers, but no one is rushing. No one is yelling for more wood or wiping sweat with their sleeve. A brother Elias, you think, nods to you and accepts the basket with a grateful smile. He does not ask what you want in return. He already knows. While you wait, you glance around. The kitchen is clean, not spotless, but considered. Everything has its place, jars lined in rows, herbs hanging in bunches, bread rising in neat baskets covered with cloth. And the smell? It's not smoke and soup. It's bread, honey, something sweet but subtle. Apples, maybe. There's even a hint of cinnamon, which makes you raise an eyebrow. That's not a peasant spice. You're offered a seat on a bench and a small bowl of warm porridge. Not the watery stuff you choke down at home, but thick, creamy, speckled with barley and crushed nuts. You eat it slowly, not because you want to savour it, though you do, but because everyone else is eating slowly, silently. Even meals here are prayers. The monk beside you chews with his eyes closed, like he's meditating on each bite. You try to do the same, but your stomach growls so loudly it echoes off the stone walls. No one reacts. You're sure it's happened before? That's the thing about monasteries in the Middle Ages. Yes, they're places of worship and learning, but they're also culinary outliers. These are people who live to serve, but also to preserve. Food here isn't just fuel, it's record-keeping, stewardship, even science. The brothers keep gardens filled with things you've never tasted. Skirets, lovage sorrel, and some kind of mint that makes your nose tingle. They dry herbs not just for flavour but for medicine. They pickle, preserve, bake and brew. And they write it all down. Here's something wild. Some of the oldest surviving medieval cookbooks came from monasteries. Recipes for spiced wine, meat pies, almond milk, sauces made with vinegar and saffron and God knows what else. Not all monks lived like this, of course. The strictest orders barely ate at all, living on bread, water and punishment. But in many places, especially Benedictine houses, food was seen as a way to honour God. And honouring God meant doing things well. You finish your porridge and hand the bowl back with a thank you that feels too loud. Brother Elias gestures for you to follow, and you're led through the herbarium, a small walled garden with rows of medicinal plants. He picks a few leaves, speaks softly about their uses, something about healing wounds, maybe scaring off infection, and hands them to you wrapped in cloth. You nod, say your thanks again, and feel, oddly, like you've left one world and returned to another. As you walk back down the hill, you think about how different things feel up there. Not just cleaner or quieter, but slower. Food isn't rushed. It's not reactionary, it's a part of the rhythm. And even though you couldn't live like that, couldn't handle the bells, the prayers, the silence, you respect it, maybe even envy it. Back home, your cousin's foot is still attached. You boil water, mix the herbs, apply the paste and try not to look too closely at the damage. He winces but doesn't scream. That's a win. Your aunt gives you a hunk of cold bread as thanks, and you chew it while watching the pot bubble, thinking about the monastery's porridge and wondering how they get it so cruem. There's a debate among scholars about just how lavish monastic food could get. Some claim it rivaled noble tables, that monks indulged in rich sauces and imported goods behind stone walls while preaching humility. Others argue that those cases were rare, exaggerated, or symbolic. Your guess? It depends. Like everything in medieval life, the answer changes with the season, the region, the personality of the abbot. But you do know this, they eat better than you, not always in quantity, but in quality, in calm, in intention. Their meals are structured, planned, infused with purpose here. Yours are whatever you can stir into a pot before sunset. That night your family eats simply. Root vegetables, leftover bread, a bit of butter scraped from the edge of a crock, but you can't stop thinking about that bowl of porridge. How something so basic, grains, water, a bit of fat, could be transformed with time, care, and maybe a pinch of something more. You resolve to try it tomorrow, just a little slower, just a little better. You stir the pot again, gently this time. Not because it needs it, but because it feels like the right thing to do. There's a chill in the air and a sort of nervous energy underfoot, the kind that crackles louder than the fire and makes everyone speak a little faster, move a little sharper. Today is another feast day. Not for your family, though. This one's bigger. This one belongs to the entire village. It's a saint's day or a local holy day, or maybe just an excuse the priest came up with to get people back into the pews. Doesn't matter. What matters is that the village green is being cleared, and every hearth in every home has started cooking at the same time. You can smell it in the wind. Meat, smoke, sweetened dough, something burning, something roasting. The whole place smells like anticipation. And you've been up since before dawn, elbow deep in dough and bossed around by 3 different people at once. Everyone cooks on feast days, not because they have to, but because you don't show up empty-handed. That's the unspoken rule. A clay dish of stew, a loaf of bread, a chunk of honeycomb if your bees were feeling generous. Everyone contributes. And if your contribution is even halfway edible, you earn a place at the communal table. Or, more accurately, Lo, on the edge of the blanket someone throws down in the mud near the fire pit. The house is chaos. 2 pots on the fire, one of them boiling over, a duck on the spit slowly crisping but not cooking fast enough, a half-kneaded ball of rye dough sitting forgotten on the bench. Your cousin is crying over spilled milk and someone just dropped a whole bowl of chopped onions, which are now mixing freely with the dog's fur on the floor. You step over it, grab the ladle, and taste the stew. Too bland. You throw in a handful of crushed herbs and a spoonful of yesterday's bacon fat. Better. You hand the ladle to your sister and move on to the bread. The bread is your job today. Flatbread specifically, simple, fast, easy to stack and carry. You've already rolled out 6 rounds, and they're resting on cloth near the hearth, waiting their turn. You add more wood to the fire, push aside one of the hanging pots, and slap the first round onto the hot stone. It sizzles immediately, bubbles rising in the dough like it's exhaling after being held too long. There's something frantic about feast day cooking, not because it's harder, but because everyone's watching. It's a performance. You want your dish to be eaten, talked about, maybe even praised. You want people to say, "You try their stew," or "That flatbread had spice in it." You want to be remembered for more than just bringing a bucket of barley mush again. In noble houses, feast days are elaborate. Course after course, dancers, musicians, whole roasted animals paraded in and carved by men with knives longer than your arm. But here in the village, things are simpler and somehow more intense, because you feel it. The pressure, the pride, the joy of making something out of almost nothing and sharing it like it's treasure. You flip the flatbread with a stick, watching the surface darken, blister, turn golden. The smell is incredible. Warm and earthy, with just a hint of the garlic you crushed and folded into the dough for flair. You pull it off the stone and set it aside. 1 down, 7 more to go. You remember last year's feast day. There was an accident with a cauldron, too much heat, too little water, and the whole thing blackened. No one said anything. Everyone ate it anyway. That's the other rule. You do not waste food on a feast day. Not when it's been blessed, stirred, carried, served. You eat it. You scrape the pot. You say it was smoky, not burnt. You pretend to love it. Everyone does. This year, though, things are looking good. The duck has started to brown. The stew smells rich and layered. The flatbreads are stacking up like warm stones on the cloth, and the butter, real butter, is softening near the fire. Even the dog looks impressed. You hear a knock, or more like a bang, and the door bursts open to reveal your neighbour, breathless, hair flying, holding a tray of pastries that look like they've barely survived the journey. She grins. "You got salt?" she asks. You toss her the pouch and she sprinkles it over the top of what appear to be honeyed oatcakes. Half of them are cracked, the other half singed. They'll still get eaten. It's a feast. Everything does. There's an open scholarly debate about how frequent or extravagant these village feasts really were. Some believe they were rare, precious breaks in a hard routine, maybe once or twice a year, barely scraping together enough for a shared pot. Others argue they were more regular, built into the rhythm of rural life, tied to the church calendar and local harvests. You don't need a scholar to tell you. You live it. These days aren't common, but they're not mythical. They're real, and they matter. Not just for the food, but for the togetherness. For the sense that, for a day at least, you're not alone in your struggle to feed a family with 2 onions and a dream. As the sun climbs higher, people begin to gather. The village green fills with cloaks and laughter. Children chasing each other, dogs stealing food, elders sitting on stumps with bowls in their laps. You arrive with your stack of flatbreads wrapped in cloth, your stew pot carried between you and your brother, and your head held just a little higher than usual. Everything goes on the table, or blanket, or grass, or tree stump. There's no real order, no menu, just a glorious mess of bowls, loaves, roasted birds, stewed roots, pickled things in jars, and that one weird dish someone always brings that nobody touches, but everyone praises. You find a spot near the fire, unroll your cloth, and start tearing the flatbreads into halves. People eat, fast at first, then slower, mouths full, eyes closing. It's not fancy, it's not clean, but it's good. You pass your bread around, you ladle stew into someone's bowl, someone passes you a slice of roasted apple with honey, and you nearly cry at the taste. There's a moment, just one, when everything goes quiet. Not silent, but quiet, like the whole village exhales together. And in that moment, you realize the food is more than just sustenance. It's connection, celebration, defiance against cold, hunger, and the daily grind. Tonight, the fire will still burn. The bread will go hard, the stew will thin. But right now you feast. The feast is over, and your house smells like sweat, smoke, and satisfaction. You wake the next morning with a full belly and sore legs, and your hands still carry the scent of garlic and duck fat. But today, there's no warm hearth waiting, no bubbling pot or flatbread on the stone. Today you're packing, because the Lord sent out a call and your father's been summoned to help build a new barn on a distant estate. It'll take a week, maybe more. And since he's not going alone, that means you're going too. Your job? Cook, feed the workers, tend the fire, keep the pots full and the bread from burning. Your mother hands you a cloth bundle, barley, beans, dried herbs, a scrap of lard, and claps you on the back like she's sending you off to battle. Make it stretch, she says. She doesn't need to. Travelling in medieval times isn't glamorous. It's muddy, cold and uncomfortable. There are no inns on this route, no markets, no taverns offering warm bread and roasted meat. Just a winding road through endless fields, with trees hunched like old men and ditches full of yesterday's rain. You carry your pot strapped to your pack, bouncing awkwardly with every step, and by midday it's knocking against your hips so hard you're thinking of just leaving it in a ditch. But you won't, because the pot is everything. It's your hearth now. Wherever you can build a fire, wherever you can hang that pot, you can cook. You can survive. You stop near a stream to make camp. The men are tired, already pulling off boots and complaining about their backs. Someone starts gathering wood. You dig a small pit, ring it with stones, and start a fire with the last of the dry moss you packed from home. The flame catches, the pot goes on. You take inventory, a small bag of oats, some dried onion, a fistful of lentils, enough for a thin gruel, maybe thicken tomorrow if you can find something worth foraging. While the water heats, you walk the nearby edge of the woods, looking for greens. You find nettles, sting your fingers, as always, but they'll cook down just fine. You spot a few wild garlic shoots, maybe some chickweed, and a mushroom that might be safe. You leave it alone. You like your organs where they are. Back at the fire, you toss in the greens, stir the pot and add the lard for flavour. The smell is better than the taste will be, but that's often the case. Someone passes you a strip of dried pork, a rare kindness, and you cut it into the pot. It softens, flavours the broth, disappears. The stew simmers while the sky darkens and the men start passing around their own bundles of food. A crust of bread here, a wedge of old cheese there. The pot becomes communal, as pots always do. You didn't ask to be the cook, but now that you are, everyone's your responsibility. This is what medieval cooking on the road looks like. Fire, pot and instinct. You cook with your ears and your nose, not recipes. You judge by how the bubbles rise, how the steam smells, how the ladle feels in your hand. No one expects perfection, just warmth. Something to fill the space between your ribs. You serve the stew with pieces of bread torn by hand and dipped directly into the pot. No bowls tonight. You all eat around the fire, hunched and quiet, letting the heat and food do their work. It's not comfortable, but it's enough. There's a quiet kind of camaraderie that forms around a travelling cook fire. You become the centre of it, not because of status, but because of necessity. People open up around food. They tell stories, laugh more easily, argue less. One man starts humming. Another tells a joke that doesn't make sense but gets a chuckle anyway. You pass the ladle, refill cups, and keep the pot from boiling over. Here's your odd fact of the night. There were actual travelling cooks in medieval Europe. Not just peasants making do like you, but professional roving cooks. They followed armies, merchant caravans, even noble hunting parties. Some carried portable stoves, small clay ovens or collapsible tripods. Others just carried spices and knives, trusting that wherever they went someone would have fire and meat. These weren't just feed the masses types. Some were artists in their own right, famous for their skill. One cook, according to rumour, once carved birds from turnips and served meat inside loaves of bread to travelling knights. You're not there yet. You're still mastering don't burn the beans. Still there's pride in what you do, in feeding tired men, in making something from nothing again. And when the last bowl is scraped and the pot is cleaned, with a bit of hot water and a handful of sand, you bank the fire and wrap yourself in your cloak beside the others. The night is cold, your feet ache, but your belly is warm, and so are the people around you. You sleep under the stars, the smell of soup still clinging to your clothes. The next few days unfold in rhythm. Walk, Work, fire, cook, sleep. Sometimes someone catches a rabbit. Once you find wild apples. Another night, a passing priest gives you a chunk of hard cheese for the pot. The stew thickens. The bread gets staler. Your hands grow tougher, and you learn to build a fire faster, shield it from wind better, make it last longer through the night. You cook in the rain, huddled under a bent branch with your pot balanced on rocks. You cook in the wind, shielding the flame with your body. You cook in silence, in exhaustion, in laughter. You become, in your own small way, a keeper of morale. Scholars still argue about how common this kind of cooking was. Some claim travelling peasants mostly ate cold food, bread, dried meat and raw vegetables. Others insist that every campfire had a pot hanging over it, that the culture of hot food followed people wherever they went. You can't speak for all of Europe, but you know one thing, you wouldn't have made it through the week without that pot. By the time you return home, your clothes are stiff with smoke, your bag lighter, and your pot darker. But you're proud. You didn't just survive, you cooked. You fed people. You kept the fire burning in more ways than one. You stepped back into your cottage, set the pot back on its hook, and let the warmth of home wash over you. You're not just a traveller anymore, you're a cook. The house feels heavier than usual, not in a bad way exactly, but in that strange, still sort of way, like the air is holding its breath. It's dusk, and the fire's burning low, but your mother hasn't stirred the pot yet. No one's chopping, no one's peeling. The only sound is the occasional hiss of sap in the firewood, and the dog snoring from under the bench. You sit cross-legged near the hearth, idly turning your knife over in your hands, watching your mother run her fingers over the edge of a bundle of dried herbs. Then she says it, soft, casual, like a whisper meant for someone else. "We need to make something for the baby." You blink. The baby in this case isn't born yet. Not even close. But your cousin's wife is showing now, and your mother has that look in her eyes again, the one she gets when something old and half-remembered is tugging at her from inside her bones. That means the kitchen's about to turn into a place of magic again. Not stage show magic, not wizard hats and glowing lights, but the old kind, the everyday kind, the kind that bubbles under the surface of fire and flour and boiling nettle water. The kind that lives in kitchens and herb bundles and whispered prayers under your breath. You've seen it before. How she sprinkles salt in the corners of the hearth when someone's sick. How she stirs porridge counterclockwise when someone's cursing their luck. How she won't let anyone bring rowan wood into the house, not after what happened with Aunt Theda. And now she's preparing for a birth, which means kitchen magic, or women's work, depending on who you ask. You watch as she opens a little wooden box from the back of the pantry. Inside, things that don't belong to food as much as they belong to something else. A twist of red thread. A dried frog's leg, a handful of crushed eggshells, a sprig of mugwort tied with hair. You don't ask her, you've learnt not to. She takes a pinch of each and adds them to a small pot of simmering water, murmuring as she stirs. The herbs steep, the fire pops, and the whole room smells like bitter tea and damp roots. You glance at your brother, who is suddenly very interested in repairing the strap on his boot, pretending not to notice. You've always found this part of cooking, the other part, a little unsettling. You love the tangible stuff, the chopping, the kneading, the bubbling. But this lives in the borderlands between healing and superstition, between medicine and myth. Still, it works, or at least people believe it works, and that in this world is enough. In medieval kitchens, the line between cook and healer was thin, and often the same hands did both. Women especially were repositories of knowledge, not just recipes, but remedies. Broth for fever, onion poultices for cough, a goose fat compress for sore joints, a bitter tea made from something that looks like it shouldn't be boiled or consumed, but works somehow, or doesn't. But again, belief counts for a lot. There's a strange debate among historians about just how much folk knowledge was passed through kitchens and how much was remembered correctly. Some argue that most of what people did was based on half-truths, old wives' tales, and dangerous guesswork. Others insist that medieval herbalists and cooks were deeply skilled, just operating outside the written academic world. They didn't have books, they had mothers. Your mother takes a rag, dips it in the steeped tea, and gently wipes down the inside of the cooking pot. Your cooking pot with it. For protection, she says, for a smooth birth. You nod, even though you're not sure you like the smell of whatever that was. It's sharp, metallic, faintly like rust and wet leaves. Still, you don't stop her, because this is part of the rhythm too, the unseen part, the part of cooking that doesn't end at the mouth. You help her grind fennel seeds next, one of the few spices you have in abundance this season, and she says they'll go into a cake of sorts, a fertility cake. Nothing sweet, not really, just flour, water, the seeds, and a little honey if there's any left in the jar. You mix it in a bowl, your fingers sticky, while she tells you not to breathe too hard over it, lest you spoil the spirit. Again, you don't ask, you just bake. The cake is small, flat, hard, you've seen better. But she wraps it in a cloth and places it in the pantry with a reverence usually reserved for church relics. When the time comes, it'll be crumbled into porridge and served warm. Later, as the evening cools, the pot over the fire becomes regular again. Turnips, barley, lentils, the familiar comfort. But it feels different tonight, like it's sharing space with something else, something older. You notice a dried branch of elder hanging above the doorframe. New. That wasn't there this morning. You see the kitchen broom has been turned bristle up and moved to the corner. Subtle changes, quiet protections. You ask your mother if it matters, if these rituals do anything. She looks at you, stirring the pot, and shrugs. If you do it right, the food listens. You think about that as you eat your dinner. The way some stews taste better when you hum while cooking them. How bread rises higher when you're in a good mood. How food goes wrong when tempers flare in the kitchen. Maybe it's not about spirits. Maybe it's just attention, care, energy. Or maybe the hearth really does have ears. Here's your strange but true historical nugget for the night. Some medieval households believed that the kitchen hearth was alive, that it could be offended, that failing to greet it each morning, yes, the fire, could bring bad luck. People would whisper blessings into the smoke. Some even gave offerings to their hearths, just as they might leave something at a shrine. You've never done that. But now you're starting to wonder if maybe you should. The fire pops, the stew simmers, the baby hasn't arrived yet, but already the kitchen is preparing, bending slightly in its habits. You add a dash of dried sage, stir 3 times clockwise, and listen to the bubbles. Cooking, you're realizing, is more than ingredients. It's presence, it's protection, it's memory, and maybe, just maybe, it's magic. Even if the dog's the only one who sees it. You're kneeling on the floor with a rag in one hand and a clay dish of thick grease in the other, trying to polish soot off a pot that's older than your father's knees. The fire is out for once, the hearth cold, the room quiet except for the soft scrape of your cloth. It's not cooking time, it's copying time. Your neighbour's son comes in holding something flat and strange. A book. Not a real book. Not the kind locked away in the manor or chained to the lectern at church, but a hand-copied set of pages bound between bits of hide, with writing so tight and careful it makes your eyes ache just looking at it. And yet, there it is, a cookbook. You sit back on your heels and try not to stare. You've heard of them, of course. The noble households keep them, passed down from one steward to the next, filled with elaborate instructions for stuffing a peacock with cherries or how to dye a pastry yellow with egg yolk and saffron. But one in your kitchen? It feels like someone dropped a holy relic into your firewood pile. He sets it gently on the bench, opens it, and starts reading aloud in a slow, halting voice. Take good broth and almond milk, and boil together with rice until it be tender, then add sugar and a little rose water. You blink. Almond milk, rose water, sugar? What planet does this recipe come from? He grins. It's called blancmange, from the court of King Edward. You glance over his shoulder. The handwriting is beautiful, but hard to read, even though it's in Middle English. You catch words like braised cinnamon, trenchers, herb sauce. It's like reading a fairy tale where the plot is boil until done. This isn't your food. Not really. This is food from a different universe. One where meat is flavoured with spices instead of onions, where bread is made with white flour and soft enough to tear, not gnaw. One where meals come in courses, not cauldrons, but that's not what surprises you most. What surprises you is the structure. The fact that someone took the time to write these things down, that they cared enough about food to preserve it with ink and parchment. You never write anything down. Recipes live in your hands, your nose, your tongue, in your mother's memory, in your grandmother's advice shouted across the yard while holding a dripping chicken. You ask to hold the book, and he hesitates. It's not his. It belongs to the Reeves brother, who borrowed it from a friend, who copied it from a monk, who, honestly, the chain of custody is a mess. But finally, he nods, and you lift the little volume like it might bite. The pages are stiff but smooth. There's a sketch in the corner of one page. Rough. Probably just a doodle, maybe a chicken, maybe not. But it gives the whole thing an almost personal touch. Someone sat here, just like you are now, in a kitchen not unlike yours, thinking about food, about how to make something again, and how to make it better. You don't have rose water. You definitely don't have sugar. But you do have rice, barely. You've been saving a small sack for a feast, but now the idea of trying something from a real medieval cookbook feels worth the gamble. You fetch the pot, fill it with water, add the rice, and begin to stir. You improvise almond milk by crushing the handful of nuts your aunt brought from town last month and soaking them in warm water. The result is gritty and thin but vaguely creamy. You add it to the rice. You can't help smiling. This isn't a stew, it's an experiment. And that's something that's often lost in modern ideas of medieval cooking, the assumption that people didn't innovate, didn't play with their food. But these books, they prove otherwise. Sure, most were written by and for the elite, but food trickles downward. Ideas spread, and even if you don't have the exact ingredients, the concept still holds. Balance, texture, timing, taste, you stir slowly. The rice thickens, the almond milk blends in. You toss in a pinch of salt, a touch of honey, and, on a whim, a crushed petal from the dried rose your mother left on the windowsill last summer. It's not rose water, not really, but the smell is subtle and sweet, like a memory. Your brother walks in and sniffs the air. That's not stew. You shake your head. It's a blanc-manger. He looks confused. That doesn't sound like food. You hand him a spoon anyway. He takes a bite, chews thoughtfully, and shrugs. Weird, but good. You ladle out 2 more bowls and pass them around. No one asks what it's called again. No one cares that it's not exactly by the book. It's warm, it's filling, it tastes like something new. That's more than enough. As the pot cools, you return the book to the neighbour's son reluctantly. He promises to bring it back when he gets more pages. He's been trying to copy it, slowly using charcoal and scraps of parchment. You offer to trade rice for recipes. He nods. Here's your fringe historical fact. The oldest known English cookbook, the Former of Curies, was compiled by King Richard II's chefs. It contains over 190 recipes, many of which sound suspiciously like they were made by people showing off at court banquets. But beneath all the flamboyance are the bones of real cooking. Pottage, sauces, roasts, porridges. Food not so different from yours, just better written. You sit by the fire and stare at your pot, still half full of your not quite blanc-manger. Tastes like ambition, like curiosity, like proof that even in a kitchen without counters, without clocks, without glass or silver or sugar, you can still cook something with imagination. And maybe that's the best kind of magic. The kind that doesn't need to be written down, but is worth remembering anyway. The sky's still grey when you step outside, the kind of heavy grey that feels like it might press the ground flat. The air smells like river mud and old leaves, and somewhere in the distance you hear frogs croaking like they have won something. It's fishing day, not because you particularly want fish, but because the calendar says you must eat it. The church has a tight grip on what goes into your mouth, and when. No meat on Fridays, no meat during Lent, none on certain saint days, and definitely none just because you feel like it. Fish, though. Fish is allowed. It's the religious loophole with fins. You hoist your basket and start the short walk to the river, past fields still wet with last night's rain. Your boots sink into the mud, but you know the path by heart. It's not a particularly good fishing day. The river's high and fast, and your net is more hope than function at this point, patched in 3 places and tangled at the corners, but you fish anyway. Because this isn't about choice, it's about obedience and survival. You're not alone either. Other villagers are crouched at the bank, tossing lines, dropping traps, trying to outwit the same lazy mud-slick fish that know exactly what day it is. The river here feeds everyone, but it rarely gives generously. Today you might get 2 eels, a perch if you're lucky. More likely you'll come home with weeds, twigs, and the satisfaction of trying. And here's the thing, medieval people ate a lot of fish. Not because they were coastal, you're not, or because they preferred it, you definitely don't, but because the church dictated over 40 fish-only days per year. Monks followed even stricter rules. Imagine trying to make your usual stew without bacon or beef or even that last scrap of duck fat. You have to get creative. So you fish. You pull your net, squint at the squirming silver inside, and grin. 1 eel, long and wriggly, slimy like a snake with a bad attitude. You hate cleaning eel. The skin doesn't come off easy, and the smell sticks to your hands like guilt. But it's food. You thank the river under your breath. Here's a weird historical truth for you. Eels were currency in parts of medieval England. People paid rent in eels. Like literally. The Domesday Book has entire records of eel taxes. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, eels were abundant, oily, and easy to preserve. Salted or smoked, they kept through winter. And they were technically not meat, so the church gave them the holy thumbs up. So yes, congratulations. You've caught a slippery little paycheck. You toss the eel into your basket, watch it thrash around like it's insulted to be there, and move along the bank. You drop your line again and settle in, watching the water. Cooking fish is different than cooking meat. It's faster, trickier. You can't just throw it into the pot and forget about it. It falls apart, goes from raw to dry in seconds. You've ruined more than a few meals learning that. When you finally return home, mud-caked and mosquito-bitten, your haul isn't impressive. 2 small eels and a bony fish that might be a tench, or might just be a weird stick. Your mother says nothing, just sighs and starts building the fire. You clean the fish in a basin outside, scraping scales and pulling guts, hoping the dog doesn't get too interested. For dinner, you fry the eel in a pan greased with what little fat you've saved. There's no butter. It's a fast day. No milk, no eggs. You flavour it with vinegar and herbs. It sizzles, curls, or tries to leap from the pan like it's Silpican judgment. You press it down with a wooden spoon and whisper something halfway between a curse and a prayer. When it's finally cooked, crisped on the edges, soft in the middle, you serve it over barley and leeks. The smell is sharp, almost briny, but not unpleasant. Everyone eats slowly. The younger kids wrinkle their noses, but they chew. Hunger is the best sauce after all. As the meal winds down, your uncle tells a story about a fisherman who once caught a pike big enough to eat a goose. No one believes him, but it doesn't matter. Stories are half the meal. There's some debate among historians about how common fish was for the average peasant. Some say it was a staple, especially in coastal regions or near rivers. Others argue that most people didn't have the tools or access, and fast-day meals were more likely to be plant-based stews or dried legumes than anything that swam. You believe both. Some years the river gives, some years it doesn't. This year you're grateful for 2 said eels and the stubbornness to catch them. In noble households, fish was more of a luxury. They had access to exotic species, sturgeon, salmon, even whale sometimes, and built elaborate fish ponds to keep a steady supply. The monks were even savvier. Many monasteries built clever aquaculture systems, raising carp and pike in artificial pools. It was God's work, but with gills. You've got the river, and maybe one day you'll dig a little pond out back and try raising fish yourself. But for now, this is enough. Dinner's done, the fire's low, your fingers still smell like eel. You sit back against the wall, belly full, and think about how much effort it took to follow one simple rule. Don't eat meat today, and yet somehow you made it happen. You fed your family, you fed yourself. You followed the rules, bent them just a little, and didn't poison anyone in the process. Not bad for a holy day. You wake to the sound of rain tapping gently on the roof, more drizzle than downpour, but steady enough to promise a muddy sort of day. Your hands already ache before you move, sore from yesterday's eel scraping and fire stoking. The hearth is dark now, embers buried under ash. The smell of last night's vinegar and fish still lingering in the corners. You sit up slowly, stretch, and listen to the familiar creaks of a house waking with its people. Today isn't a feast day, or a fast day, or any kind of church-marked occasion. Today is just ordinary. And in the medieval world, ordinary means work. You don't farm full-time, but you help your neighbours when it's needed. And today it's your turn to help thresh grain. Again. That means a long walk, a long day, and most importantly, a packed lunch. Yes, packed lunch. No canvas tote bags or Tupperware involved, of course. Just a cloth bundle teed with twine and packed with the most portable, least perishable things you can scrape together. You open the pantry and take inventory. Stale rye bread? Check. Piece of hard cheese? Check. Apple that's bruised but still edible? If you turn it the right way. Excellent. But it's what you pack last that really matters. The thing that makes it a meal, the hand pies. Now, if you're imagining something golden, flaky and bursting with buttery juices, stop right there. This pie is about utility, not beauty. The crust is thick, dry, tough as old boots, made from flour, water and a little lard if you're lucky. But it's built for travel. like a bread armour for whatever sad little filling you can tuck inside. Today it's mashed beans and leeks with a little dried thyme. You press the dough around the filling, crimp it shut, and bake it in the hearth's embers until the outside darkens to something between browned and accidentally smoked. Then into the bundle it goes, along with a knife and your hopes that it won't crumble into dust before noon. Hand pies are a kind of miracle in the Middle Ages. They're the answer to the question, how do I eat when I'm too far from my fire? You see them everywhere. At market stalls, in field workers' bundles, in the hands of children running between chores. They're easy to carry, hard to ruin, and vaguely filling. You once ate one made entirely of cabbage and mustard seed. It was horrifying, but it stayed with you all day. There's a long and storied history to portable medieval food. Pies, of course, top the list, but there were also oatcakes. Flat, thin rounds cooked on hot stones and wrapped in cloth. Or boiled eggs with a twist of salt. In some towns, people carried soups in sealed jars, or made thick porridges they could scoop and eat cold. It wasn't fine dining, it was functional dining. Fuel for the body, not the soul. You sling your food bundle over your shoulder, pull on your cloak, and step out into the wet morning. The road is thick with mud, but familiar. You know every rut and puddle. When you arrive at the barn, it's already humming with the dull rhythm of flails beating against grain stalks. You join in, falling into the motion like you never left it. Hours pass. Grain dust sticks to your skin. Your arms throb. Your stomach begins to growl, and you eye the far wall where everyone's set down their bundles. The old man across from you already has his out. He's gnawing on a thick heel of bread like it insulted him. Someone else shares a jug of weak ale. A woman tears her pie in half and passes it to her daughter, who immediately drops a chunk in the hay. When the break is called, you sit on a beam and untie your bundle with reverence. Your crust has cracked slightly, but the filling's still intact. You bite into it, and yeah, it's dry, a little bland, but hot damn, it's food. It's your food, you eat every crumb. Someone next to you is eating a pie with what smells like salted fish inside. Another has a mash of mashed peas and mint. A third has one filled with goose fat and oat crumbs. Luxurious, really. No one judges anyone's lunch. There's no performance here, no pretending. You eat what you bring, and what you bring is what you had. That's the contract. One of the younger boys asks if you've ever had a sweet hand pie, and everyone around him laughs like he's suggested flying to the moon. Sweet? With what sugar? What fruit? Maybe once a year if someone brings jam from town or dried plums from a trade. But even then it's hoarded, not baked into portable crusts. Still the idea lingers in your head as you chew your last bite. A sweet pie, imagine. There's a debate, of course, because there's always a debate, among food historians about how much sugar and spice filtered down to the lower classes. Some argue that by the late Middle Ages, things like cinnamon and ginger were more accessible than we assume. Others insist those luxuries stayed on noble tables. Either way, you know that if anyone in the village gets hold of dried figs or honeyed almonds, they're not putting it in a pie for lunch in a hay barn. You wash down your meal with a sip of ale, wipe your hands on your cloak and get back to threshing. The grain must be beaten, the chaff separated, the stalks bundled. There's no time to savour. But your belly is full and your hands don't shake with hunger, and that counts for something. At the end of the day, you walk home through puddles and hoofprints, your arms sore but your mind already planning tomorrow's meal. Maybe another hand pie, maybe oat cakes, maybe just stew in a sealed pot. Whatever it is, it'll need to travel again. There's always more work to be done, somewhere. You step into the house and shake off the rain. The hearth is lit now, smoke curling lazily into the chimney, and your mother is stirring something in a pot with the practiced calm of someone who's been doing it all day. "Good work?" she asks. "Decent," you reply, pulling out the empty cloth bundle, holding it up like a trophy. She grins. "Pie hold together?" "Barely, but it fed you." You nod. And that's all it ever needs to do. The wind's sharper this morning, blowing down from the hills with that unmistakable edge that smells like old frost and the kind of cold that gets into your bones before it even settles in the soil. It's not quite winter, but the seasons are shifting. You feel it in the way your joints creak when you kneel by the fire. You see it in the way the bread doesn't rise as much anymore, even when you set the dough near the warmest part of the hearth. And you hear it in your mother's voice when she says, almost absently, "We'll need to salt the meat soon." It's not panic. It's just reality. Winter means preservation, not in a poetic, nostalgic sense, but in the literal survival sense. There will be no fresh turnips in January, no fresh anything really, so what you can't eat now you must find a way to store, which is why today you're learning how to salt meat, and why your house now smells like something between a butcher's stall and a damp cave. Your uncle arrives just after dawn hauling a gutted pig carcass over his shoulders like it's firewood. It's a good size, already stiff from the cold morning, and you can tell by the way he's grinning through his beard that he's been waiting for this moment. "Best pig we've had in years," he says, and your mother nods. No one wastes time with sentiment. The pig's dead. Now comes the important part, keeping it from going bad. You set up in the outbuilding, where the wind is kept mostly out and the stones are cool. The pig is laid across a rough wooden table. You sharpen knives, bring out basins, bowls, and your salt sack. A precious commodity, guarded like treasure. Salt doesn't grow on trees, after all. It's brought in from coastal towns, traded for grain or wool, and used carefully, sparingly, except during preservation season, when you practically drown things in it. The process is simple in theory. You cut the meat into manageable pieces, shoulders, hocks, ribs, and rub it down with coarse salt until your fingers stings. Every crevice gets packed. Then the pieces go into a wooden barrel, layered like bricks, each one resting on a thick crust of salt. No air, no moisture, no mercy, just the harsh white preservation of necessity. It's grim work. The blood, the bone, the way the meat smells not like food, but like something recent and alive. You don't talk much while you work. No one does. There's a kind of reverence in it, but also a kind of urgency. This isn't just tradition, it's survival. And here's the odd historical fact for the day. In medieval Europe, salted meat was such a staple that some people preferred it over fresh, especially in winter. The taste wasn't necessarily better, but it was reliable, available, and familiar. In fact, nobles often had entire rooms dedicated to salting and curing meats, though theirs were more likely to include exotic spices and drying racks that made your little smokehouse look like a cupboard with delusions of grandeur. Your house doesn't have a smokehouse, but it does have a smoky ceiling, a strong hook, and a fire that never truly dies. So when the salting is done, your mother sets a few special cuts aside, ribs, belly, the better slices of bacon, and begins preparing them for smoking. You help string them with twine, watching as she dips each piece in a simple brine first. Salt, a touch of honey, crushed juniper if you've got it. Then up they go, hanging from the low rafters like ghostly decorations, swaying slightly in the draught. Beneath them she adds fresh wood to the fire, damp wood on purpose, so that it'll smoulder and smoke instead of flare and burn. The smoke curls upward in slow, deliberate waves, cloaking the meat like a blanket. And that's another preservation method. Smoke. Combined with salt, it gives you meat that can last weeks and even months, depending on luck, temperature, and rodent resistance. It also gives everything in the house the faint flavour of hickory and ash. Your hair, your clothes, your dreams. Smoke is inescapable this time of year. Of course, not everything gets salted or smoked. Some things get dried, fruit mostly or herbs, apples sliced thin and laid on woven racks above the hearth, rotating gently in the rising heat. Plums, if you were lucky to trade for some, shriveled into chewy little jewels. Even mushrooms, hung by their stems in clusters like upside-down bouquets. Then there's pickling, that's your aunt's domain. She shows up before noon with a crock under one arm and a satchel of cabbages in the other. Within the hour, your kitchen smells like vinegar and garlic and something you can only describe as nose stabbing. She's making sauerkraut again. She mashes the cabbage with salt in a huge basin, packs it into the crock with herbs and spices, and weighs it down with a heavy stone. "Let it rot in the right way," she says with a wink, "and you'll be glad in February." There's debate, even among local folks, about which preservation method is best. Your uncle swears by salt, your aunt insists on brine. Your neighbour dries everything to the point of tooth breaking. And then there are the risky ones, those who try to keep milk or soft cheese longer than they should, and wind up with stomach cramps and 3 days of regret. Scholars still argue about just how advanced medieval food preservation really was. Some insist peasants lived in constant fear of spoilage, that their cellars were breeding grounds for disaster. Others point to the cleverness of these techniques, the layered salting, the precise timing of smoke, the use of ash to seal cheese and clay to seal jars, and say, give them more credit. You lean toward the second group. Maybe because your own belly has been saved more than once by a slab of smoked pork in late January. By evening, the meat is salted, the kitchen is smoked, the pickling crock is sealed, and your entire house smells like a butcher's dream and a dog's fantasy. You scrub your hands raw in a bucket, trying to get the blood out from under your nails. Your mother hands you a slice of bread and a thick curl of fresh bacon, lightly fried in its own fat. Just a taste before it goes into the smoke. You eat it with your fingers. It's salty, rich. It melts just a little on your tongue. Food, in this moment, tastes like preparation. It tastes like a promise that winter won't win. You're up before the sun, breath rising in small white puffs as you poke at the dying coals with a stick, trying to coax the fire back to life. The house is still dark. The floorboard's cold underfoot, and the dog is huddled so tightly in the corner that he looks like a bundle of old fur someone left behind. Outside, frost slicks the grass and sparkles on the shutter's edge like someone dusted the world in crushed glass. You shiver, then you shiver again, and then you decide that whatever's for breakfast had better be hot. There's a bit of leftover pottage from last night, hardened in a crock with the consistency of damp clay. You scrape it into the pot, add water and set it over the fire. As it softens, you crush a clove of garlic, toss it in, and crumble in a bit of stale bread to thicken it back up. This isn't glamorous food, this is survival stew. But you don't need glamour, you need warmth. As the fire crackles and the smell of garlic fills the room, your little sister wanders out from the bed closet, rubbing her eyes. She's still wrapped in a blanket like a walking turnip. "Is it breakfast?" she mumbles. You nod and hand her a spoon, and together the two of you sit cross-legged on the floor, dipping into a pot of yesterday's salvation. This is what most mornings look like. Not bread and jam, not fried eggs or creamy porridge or whatever nonsense people think rustic means. It's leftovers, warmed over a rekindled fire, eaten from a shared bowl before the workday begins. And while it might not look like much, it does the trick. Still, as the frost creeps deeper into the corners of the house, you can't help but think of other breakfasts, the kind you've heard whispered about. Dishes not meant for commoners like you. Take the nobles, for example. Some of them start their day with roasted meats, eggs, and ale. Hot pies, even. With venison or sweetened fruits, depending on the season. They eat sitting up in bed on cushions while servants carry in trays like it's the most normal thing in the world to eat swan pie while still wearing a nightcap. Even monks eat differently. You've seen the priory's morning meal. Thick broth made from barley and herbs, sometimes even fish, all served in polished wooden bowls. Their bread is finer too. Bolted flour, pale and soft. You'd trade a week's worth of chores just for one bite of bread that didn't try to fight you back. But here's something you've come to understand: while wealth dictates variety, it doesn't always dictate health. There's a fringe theory among a few modern scholars that peasants, despite the obvious hardships, actually ate more balanced meals than the elite. More grains, more legumes, less heavy meat and sugar. You're not sure you'd call yourself healthy per se. You're constantly sore, always tired, and your right knee sounds like a drum when you bend it. But you haven't dropped dead yet. Your father comes in next, clomping in with boots heavy from the frost, brushing icicles off his hood. He grunts a greeting and eyes the pot. You hand him the spoon without a word. That's another rule in a peasant kitchen. Whoever's home first eats first, but no one eats alone. The pot's nearly empty by the time your mother wakes. She gives the three of you a tired look and pulls out another crust of bread from the pantry, cracks it in half and dunks it straight into the dregs at the bottom. Her breakfast is more spoon than stew, but she doesn't complain. You head outside after the meal, breath fogging the air, and start the morning's chores. There's wood to chop, eggs to collect, and the goat to scold for chewing on the laundry line. Again. But all the while your mind drifts back to the kitchen, to food. To what else you can make when supplies are low and the weather's worse. And then it hits you: pantry soup. It's not a real recipe, just a name you made up for when you throw every edible thing you can find into a pot and pray it doesn't turn grey. You go back inside and start scavenging. A wilted carrot, a turnip that's more root than vegetable, half an onion, a few leaves of dried sage. There's a handful of dried peas you've been hoarding in a jar, and you toss those in too. Back in the hearth, the embers are still alive. You coax the flame higher, set the pot over it, and begin building a meal out of scraps. You add salt, just a pinch of that stuff's expensive, and maybe a little of the salted meat that's hanging near the chimney. Not much, just enough to add depth. The kitchen fills with that slow, simmering smell, the one that promises lunch will be better than breakfast. Your sister helps slice bread. Your mother grates the hard cheese rind into the pot for flavour. It's a group effort. Always is. And here's the thing about ordinary food: it's shared. That's what defines a peasant kitchen more than anything else. You cook together, you eat together, you scrape the bowls together. No one has their own dish. No one says my bread or my portion. You divide what you have. And if there's not enough, well, someone eats less, and someone gives up a bite. It's not perfect, it's not fair, though it's how it is. While the soup simmers, you take a minute to watch the steam rise from the pot. It curls and twists like smoke signals, messages to no one in particular. You wonder how many people have done this exact thing in kitchens like yours, how many hands have stirred a pot and whispered, "Please, just let it taste good this time." There's a quiet dignity in this kind of cooking. You're not crafting meals for applause, you're not chasing flavour profiles or plating for aesthetics. You're feeding people. You're keeping the house warm. You're turning cold days into bearable ones with just a pot and a little imagination. Your brother stumbles in around midday, face flushed from chopping wood. He kicks it off his boots, sniffs the air, and groans in gratitude. "What is it?" he asks. "Pantry soup," you say. He nods. "Best kind." And just like that, lunch begins. You never thought you'd see it, but here it is, a piece of fruit you've never tasted before, sitting in the palm of your hand like it just fell out of a dream. It's not an apple, not a pear, not any sort of plum. It's a small, wrinkled, reddish-brown, and smells faintly of molasses, and could it be smoke? The merchant called it a date, and you're still not entirely convinced it's food. But after helping unload sacks of grain for half the afternoon in exchange for a peek at the travelling merchant's cart, he handed you this little treasure and said, "Try it.